morning. Thank you. Thanks.
Good morning, Chair. We'll now be hearing from Dan Lake.
Repeat after me, please. I do solemnly, sincerely and truly, declare and affirm that the evidence I shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Thank you.
Thanks. Can you give your full name, please?
Daniel Lake.
And Mr. Lake, you've given an inquiry statement dated the 31st of January 2022. We have that reference BDP 000002. I'm going to ask the Chair to adjust that in full. And Mr. Lake, what that means is your statement is now evidence for the inquiry, and it means I don't have to go through each paragraph because it's already in evidence. So if I can start with your background. So you worked at Brook House from August 2016 to December 2017, is that right?
That's correct.
And your specific role was as activities officer, yeah?
Yes.
And you say in your statement, Mr. Lake, that you applied because you thought the role of DCO at Brook House would provide a steady career and steady income, is that right?
That's correct, yes.
Was there anything in particular that gave you that impression, or was it just the idea of working for a big company?
Yeah, just a big company. I worked in construction before, so it had its ups and downs, but I knew this would be constant income, basically.
And you say in your statement that the recruitment process didn't prepare you for the role. You say that the training was largely theoretical and didn't prepare you for the reality of the place.
Yeah.
If you can sort of take yourself back to what you were thinking at that point, during your training, what were you expecting Brook House to be like?
I mean, nothing you can do can prepare you to work in an environment like that, I don't think. It's hard to say, really. I mean, yeah, doing theory work like in classrooms and stuff is nothing like what the centre's like, basically. And I didn't know what to expect, to be fair, but it definitely wasn't that.
And when you did start, was it quite a shock to you?
At the start, no. Sort of got worse as it went on.
Okay. And you say in your statement that because you had no knowledge of the role that you were going to be doing, you had no reason to doubt the adequacy of the training whilst you were doing it. Once you started work, did you begin to doubt whether the training was adequate?
I did think to myself, this isn't what we were sold at the start.
Do you think
I think they made it obviously made it sound better to get people in, which companies do, but it was the complete opposite from what they were training us for.
So you think they were sort of deliberately making the job sound a bit more attractive than it was in reality?
100%.
And was that something you sort of talked to colleagues about?
No, not
just
colleagues.
Something you thought?
Yeah.
Okay. Looking at the culture of Brook House, you describe in your statement, Mr. Lake, that you describe it as a pretty bad culture, is the phrase you use, a very macho type of place in which the attitudes between staff and detainees were not great, and you describe a general mutual disrespect, yeah?
Yeah.
Why did staff have a disrespect for detainees?
I think it was more just the stress of the job and frustration. You know, like, people would come to you and want help, and we didn't have the facilities to help them. It's just natural to get frustrated in that situation.
With the detained people?
Yeah.
And do you think that, I mean, how did you, if you can remember, how did you see this group of people? Like,
I mean, I didn't personally deal with it every day because I was an activities officer, not on the wings. But when you're the sports officer in activities, you wander around, and because you got to check on the pool tables and stuff like that, so you get a vibe of what's going on, and it was just a bad vibe generally.
Okay. And
from both, from staff and detainees.
Yeah, and you talk about that mutual disrespect, but do you accept that, given that the staff choose to be there and the detainees don't choose to be there, do you accept that there's a difference between the positions of the people?
Yeah.
So there's a difference between staff being verbally abusive to detained people and detained people being verbally abusive to staff, because whilst it might be the same words that are speaking, you're coming from different positions, right? Okay. And you also say in your statement that managers were largely absent and not supportive. and you say that the attitude was to get on with it or to man up if there were any issues, yeah?
Yeah.
Does that, when you talk about managers in that context, is that referring to DCMs or is that more senior managers?
DCMs, yeah.
Okay. And we heard yesterday, I don't know if you listened to the evidence of Dan Small yesterday, but he used similar language to talk about Brook House. He talked about a macho culture and being told to man up. Are these things that you guys spoke about while you were there?
No, I've never really spoke about it, no.
Is it just
no one really spoke about that sort of stuff to each other at work.
Is it something you've spoken about with him since?
No.
Okay. So it's just a coincidence that you're using the same sort of words?
Yeah, must be.
Okay. At paragraph 11 of your statement, you say that if management did show up to deal with an issue, they would just immediately agree with a detainee to keep the peace. Can you give an example of the type of situation in which that might happen?
God. I couldn't think of a situation, no. It was very much just agree with them to keep the peace, basically. So it's easier to tell the staff just to get on with it than to tell a detainee to get on with it, because then they would kick up more of a fuss. It was just more just to keep the peace.
But you don't mean, do you, that if a detainee complained that they'd been attacked or abused, that the managers would just agree with that? No.
No.
So what type of thing do you mean?
Just little arguments, like I can't. To be honest with you, I can't remember a specific incident.
Okay.
They would just normally take the detainee side regardless.
So I mean, we've heard evidence from formerly detained people who say that they felt that management would always take the side of officers. Do you think that's wrong?
Yeah, that's wrong.
You think the management would take the side of detainees?
100% wrong.
Okay. Later in your statement, Mr. Lake, you say that Brook House wasn't the sort of place where you'd raise any issues, because if you reported someone, you might be concerned the managers would go straight to that person with your allegation, yeah?
Mm-hmm.
And was there ever any thought that you could report someone anonymously, make an anonymous complaint about somebody?
No, I think it would all get out in the end.
And what were you worried would happen if you reported someone?
Personally,
yeah.
I wasn't worried about anything.
Okay.
But it could make it awkward, can't it, working with people that you know that have said you've done this and done that. It would become an awkward place to work.
So is this you talking more generally about why there might be a culture of not reporting, not you talking about why you didn't report things? Okay. We've already talked, you say in your statement at paragraph 22 about it being a very macho culture, and you say that it was not a place where people would necessarily feel they could take action, and you say, for example, management would probably laugh at you if you complained someone was bullying you. Is that a theoretical example? Or is that...
Yeah, that's the vibe they give off.
And is that referring to DCMs or senior management?
Yeah, DCMs. I didn't really have anything to do with this senior. Never saw them, never spoke to them.
So you felt that if you went to a DCM saying X was bullying me, they'd just laugh at you and tell you to man up?
Yeah, I reckon so. If not to your face, definitely behind your back.
Okay. More broadly, talking about senior management, Mr. Lee, you say at paragraph 24, you say, I think they showed a very poor quality of leadership, were invisible and left staffed, unsupported and outnumbered. What do you mean by them being invisible? Is that them not being around on the
I never saw them. They never made themselves visible at all.
And when we're talking about senior management here, are we talking about what, Ben Saunders, Steve Skett, these type of guys, or who are you thinking
I think
about?
so. If they were the senior managers, I can't remember if they were, but if they were, then yes.
Okay.
I don't remember them, so they were clearly not visible enough for me to remember them.
Okay, and I know that you were activities officer, so you weren't constantly on a wing, but you were walking around the wings often, yeah?
Yeah.
And so were there senior management that you saw regularly? No. Okay. And one of the things you say, and I know we're on the same issues, but it's important to sort of try and get to the bottom of this, is that the very macho culture was shaped by senior management, is something that you say at paragraph 68 of your statement. Is there anyone in particular that you think shaped that culture?
What, senior?
Yeah. So if you look at paragraph 68 of your statement.
68.
Yeah, page 22, paragraph 68. It's right at the end. It's the final sentence of 68.
Oh yeah.
Who are you thinking of when you're saying that?
I wouldn't know. I couldn't remember names of senior managements at
So
all.
why do you say that they're shaping the culture then?
Because I would assume that the managers would have got their role through senior managers, so they would have taken a leaf out of their book, sort of thing.
Okay.
So it's like a ladder.
So it's not that you saw or heard them shaping the culture.
No.
It's just that you assumed that
Yes,
that was shaping.
that was my fault. Yeah.
Right. And do you think that this macho culture that you talk about, did that affect the way that you and your colleagues approached control and restraint and use of force and things like that?
Possibly. I mean, I didn't really do many of them, but I would say so.
Because, I mean, obviously, control and restraint is a physical act,
Yeah.
using force on somebody who doesn't want to have force used on them. And do you think the macho culture sort of feeds into... Do you think, I mean, for example, do you think that that culture led to people using force when they didn't need to use force ever?
I never saw it. I wouldn't know if people use force without needing to.
When you were involved in it or saw it,
Yeah.
did you ever think, that's not quite necessary, or that we don't need
No.
to do that? Did you ever see excessive force?
No.
No. Okay. One of the things you say in your statement talking about morale is, this is back at paragraph 7 of your statement, you say that staff morale was very low and you were always understaffed and turnover was extremely high. And that's something we heard from Mr. Small yesterday as well.
Mm-hmm.
And was that something that was talked about amongst you?
Yeah, everyone spoke about being short-staffed.
And the consequences of that?
Just morale was low. Everyone was just downbeat from the start. When you come in and see the rota straight away and realise how many people are in the building, straight away you're on a back burner. I think, it's to be a long day. Yeah, that's why morale was mostly down, was staffing reasons.
And you say the consequences of it were that sort of people felt downbeat, but what were the consequences? You've then got a 13-hour shift.
Yeah.
How does that affect you when you're...
Because you'd be doing, say there's 3 officers on the wing, you're doing that officer's work if they're not there, so your workload becomes more. Basically.
So you have more work, so that makes you downbeat.
But it's just added stress.
Okay. And do you think that was ever taken out, that frustration was ever taken out on detainees?
Not that I saw.
And did you ever raise any concerns, either formally or informally, about staffing levels?
No.
Was that something you ever talked about? We should put in a complaint,
No.
we should ask for more staff?
No.
Did you have any understanding of why there was a shortage of staff?
I mean, the staff come in, they just left straight away. The actual the
do you mean
turnover
in
of staff.
terms of, sorry, do you mean people would start and then they'd leave
Oh yeah.
very quickly?
Yeah. Within weeks.
And is that, do you think, related to what you said at the beginning about the training not really
Yeah.
preparing?
People
you for the
come
role?
in and be like, "Wow, this is not what I thought," and then they leave. So the staff were coming through the door, but they were going out quicker than they were coming in.
So your perception was that the reason why staffing levels were so low was that there just weren't enough people that could actually...
Just wasn't prepared for what they thought they were going into. If that
Okay.
makes sense.
One of the things you say was a consequence of that, and we've already talked about this a little, is that attitudes towards detainees weren't great due to shortages of staff, meaning that staff were on the back foot and that there was a lot of hostility from detainees. What sort of examples can you give of that attitude towards detainees not being great? Is that shouting? Is that swearing? Is that just the way that people
From
look
officers?
At? Yeah.
I wouldn't, like I said, I didn't work on the wings, so I wouldn't know. I mean, I did a few shifts on the wings, but then normally when activities have got to work on the wings, you just become the guy that opens the door, because you have to open the door to the wing and let people in and out, they would normally just spend 13 hours doing that. Because I didn't know the run-ins of the wing. I didn't know how to operate the wing office. So literally, I'd be opening the door for 13 hours.
For 13 hours. How did that sort of work affect you?
Training.
Draining.
It's just draining, yeah. I mean, you have no issue with anyone because all you're doing is opening and closing the door. But yeah.
But when you talk about attitudes towards detainees not being great, is that then something you got an impression of from talking to staff?
Yeah, and normally it would come from when it normally come from a detainee talking to you. You'd be in the office and someone would come in with a bad attitude, and then you just give a bad attitude back. I would have thought that's how I think it would have gone down anyway.
Okay. Did you think that the way, I know this is talking quite broadly, but did you think the way that staff talked about detainees was appropriate mostly?
No.
Okay. Why not?
Like I said, it was just a bad place to work. I don't think anyone wanted to actually work there.
Don't think anyone wanted to
Yeah,
work
I don't
there?
think anyone actually wanted to work there. Everyone wanted to get out, I think, personally.
One of the things you say is that because you were short-staffed, this is at paragraph 29 of your statement, you say that sometimes you were short-staffed to such an extent that you weren't able to open the courtyard, which meant detainees couldn't get any fresh air. And again, we heard about this a little bit from Dan Small yesterday. But I mean, can you tell us why couldn't you open the courtyard? Was that because
Short-staffed?
And would that mean that activities officers are on the wings?
Yeah.
Right.
Like I said, we would open the courtyards, but if we're covering break and people aren't coming back or they started late, then obviously we can't just leave the wing until they return, so then nothing gets opened until we're free.
And do you think that people who weren't activities officers valued the importance of things like opening the courtyards and activities enough?
No.
Why do you say that?
I think people just thought, just sit around all day, sit in the library, sit in the IT room. That's what I think anyway. But
that's what they thought of you guys in the activities team?
Yeah, definitely.
And what did you think about the value of activities? How important did you see it?
I didn't know any different, really. I knew it was important because obviously the IT room is where they get their emails from solicitors and stuff, and the library is where they can get all their forms to apply for bail and stuff. So I knew it was important, but when you've done nothing else but activities, I suppose you don't really realise until you get out there, you look back and think, without that, it would have been a lot worse in there.
Do you think that there was an attitude from others to see activities as a sort of bonus that people can get if things are going well, rather than something that was needed?
Say that again, sorry?
Do you think that staff who weren't activities officers saw activities, and that means whether we're talking about sports or even just getting into the courtyard for fresh air, if you can call that an activity, do you think that they saw that as just like a bonus that would happen if things are going well, rather than as something?
No, the wing staff were aware that it needed to open.
Right.
But it just sometimes didn't work out, where breaks would overlap and then people wouldn't get back on time. As soon as you were relieved of the wing, you would go straight to your post and do what you've got to do. I mean, it was never a case of, I'm not opening that, or you don't deserve that. It was always just waiting for people to get back to positions.
And I know it's going to be hard to give any specifics here, but how often do you think it was that the courtyards wouldn't be open? Are we talking once a week, once a month, once a day?
I wouldn't know.
Any rough estimate? I mean,
no.
you were there for a year and a half or something like that. Roughly, can you remember? Did it happen 3 times or 20 times?
They didn't open at all?
Yeah.
Oh no, they always opened.
Okay, it
was just
be late.
Sometimes it'd be late. They wouldn't get the full. Yeah, they wouldn't get out there for the full time they were supposed to.
Okay. Now, some of the words you use at paragraph 9 of your statement to describe Brook House, before we move on, you talk about it being a crazy place, not really being a safe place, and you talk about some detainees being terrified and about staff not feeling safe either. Did you consider that the people that were in there, the detained people, were vulnerable? Did you see them as vulnerable?
Some. Not all.
Okay. And obviously that the way it's described there might suggest to people that there was a sort of equal lack of safety, but presumably you would accept that given that staff have equipment, an emergency button, etc., that it's not quite the same level of safety.
I mean, when you're on a wing with 2 officers and there's 100 odd detainees, it's not a safe place to be, because if they decide that they've had enough, red button or not, you've not got a chance. But equally, I do get what you're saying, that once people do arrive, we have got the equipment and stuff like that.
And, I mean, personally, were you scared physically?
Personally?
Yeah.
No, because I think the detainees saw us as activities officers, not wing. I think they separated us from wing officers, if that made sense. So
you thought they were less likely to...
They wouldn't really come to us with their issues or tell us their problems, because they thought, we were just library officers or IT officers.
Okay. And just briefly, whilst we're still talking about sort of staffing levels and safety, one of the things you say at paragraph 66 in the context of talking about drugs at Brook House is you say you didn't have the staffing levels to actually challenge anyone in relation to drugs. What do you mean by that?
I think that means carrying out searches and stuff, so you'd obviously have to have officers to do searching. But if you've got basic staffing, say 2 on a wing, how can you form a 3-man team to go and do a room search?
Is it because was it necessary to have a 3-man team?
I think it was 3. I'm pretty sure 2 searched and a manager would overlook. I might be wrong, but I think that is it.
But you felt that part of the reason why drugs were a big issue at Brook House was because you just didn't have the staffing to do the searches?
I think so.
I want to move on to talk about the facilities at Brook House. One issue that you say caused frustration to detainees was the computers being very slow, meaning that they often had trouble accessing emails. You say that you reported it to management, and we're going to come on to a transcript about that, and nothing was done. Is that right?
Yep.
And do you have any idea why nothing was done by management? Do you think it was deliberate, or they didn't care, or something else?
I think it's a bit of both.
Okay.
Mainly care. I mean, management talking about my line manager.
Who was your line manager?
Ramon.
Ramon, okay.
They never dealt with any of the issues, so they didn't care because they didn't get the brunt of it.
And do you think that is that back to what we were talking about before about them not really realising the importance of this stuff for detainees?
I think so.
Okay. And were you aware of, because we've heard some evidence about from detainees complaining that Wi-Fi and mobile phone signal would drop around the time of charter flights or big removals? Were you aware of that being an issue?
No, I never heard that when I was there.
Okay. If we can have up on screen, please, TRN 0000083, and that's at tab 12 of your bundle, Chair.
Thank you.
If we can go to page 31, please. Mr. Lake, this is a transcript of a conversation that you had with Callum Tully and an officer called Kerry, in which you describe, and I'm just going to summarise it because it's about 3 pages, so rather than going through everything, but you describe the slowness of the computers as a fucking joke and say that it's going to kick off. When you say it's going to kick off, is that detainees reacting badly to the slowness? And one of the things you say at the bottom of that is that you described them as the IBM, but I think it's the IMB, about it, and they said, if we turn over to page 32, you said they come in and you said to them, look, and they said, oh, I've heard it's a bit hit and miss, and you said, no, it's not even a hit, it's just completely missed every single day, it's a fucking joke. and you say, well, I didn't actually say it like that, but I was like, it's a joke, they can't even access their emails, let alone anything to do with the case. Do you think the IMB took it seriously?
No, because nothing was ever done about it.
Okay. And you go on to say, just to summarise it, that you thought the detainees might smash up the computers because then they'd be sent away, the computers, because they weren't working. Did that ever actually happen?
Yeah.
It did. And did the computers get fixed?
No. Just meant there was less computers available for detainees.
And again, actually, no, I'll move on. At the bottom of this page, it's noted that you'd handed in a letter, line 1156. Kerry says, Dan handed in that letter, and you say, yeah. Then it's from the detainees saying how bad it was, and you say there's about 30 signatures on it. Do you remember that?
No.
And if we go over to the next page, you say at the top, nothing will get done about it until they do something. As soon as they kick off, that's when the letter isn't nothing. They'll go upstairs and throw it away before it goes to the Home Office. Do you remember who you were talking about when you're saying they'll throw it away?
Probably senior managers. That's who I would have thought it would have went to.
And so, I know you can't remember exactly what happened, but what this shows is you had a letter with 30 signatures saying something about the computers being rubbish. And you'd handed that in, but nothing had happened in response.
By going by that, yes, but I don't remember it.
Okay. And, I mean, one of the things that obviously comes across from this is that you talked about detainees potentially kicking off, smashing computers, but equally what this seems to suggest is that there was quite a, what you might call a sort of democratic response, which is organising a petition with 30 signatures. Did you see that? Was that something that, I know you can't remember this exact scenario, did that ever happen otherwise with detainees getting
not
letters
that I'm aware
saying?
of.
No, okay. Want to ask about another aspect of access to facilities. If we can have up on screen TRN 0000082, please, at page 10. And Chair, that's tab 20 of your bundle. And just while it's coming up, this is a transcript of a conversation between you, Dan Small, Callum Tully, and potentially somebody else on the 11th of June 2017. And one of the discussions in the middle of the page is about who's cooking, which I think is about the cultural kitchen. Do you remember the cultural kitchen?
Yeah.
Can you briefly explain what the cultural kitchen was?
The detainees could cook their own food from where they were from, basically get their ingredients and cook their own meals.
And was that something that was important to them, did you think?
Yeah.
And at line 225 there, Callum Tully asks, didn't you say DX4, who's detainee, was cooking? And it records Dan Small as replying, saying, no, he's not. He's pissing me off. I know this is not you saying it, but you were part of this conversation. Yeah. Were you aware of staff preventing detained people from using the cultural kitchen as a punishment? No. Did you ever do that?
No.
Okay. One of the... sorry, I should ask, if you had been aware of that, was that something you'd have seen as appropriate, as sort of preventing access just because someone's pissing you off?
Would I see it as appropriate?
Yeah.
No.
Okay.
Although, if you was arguing with a detainee that was going to go into the culture kitchen, it would probably be a good idea not to, because they've got access to all sorts in there, as it's a kitchen, knives, the lot. So you'd have to, only certain detainees could go in there, not everyone.
So you would see it as appropriate if it was a safety issue?
You'd probably swap officers.
Okay.
So if you've had an argument with one, you didn't feel comfortable going in there because obviously it's risky. You would swap officers.
So rather than banning the detainee from accessing it, you'd swap officers. Okay. If we can turn to your statement at paragraph 30, you talk about Tinsley House staff and you describe them as being completely out of their depth at Brook House, and it being obvious they were scared. What were the consequences of having scared staff in there?
No consequences, really.
How did you know they were scared or see that they were scared?
Just mannerisms, really. I mean, they're not used to that environment because obviously Tinsley House is a completely different environment to Brook House.
Yeah, you describe, you say that the reality is that Tinsley House was like a daycare, whereas Brook House was like a prison.
Yeah.
What did you see as the reason for that difference?
Why Brook House was more like a prison? For the people in it, the way it was built. Tinsley House is not built anything like Brook House.
Okay. And do you think that detainees at Brook House were treated like prisoners?
I wouldn't know, really. I don't know how prisoners have never worked in a prison.
Well, you say that Brook House is like a prison.
From what I've seen and what I would expect from a prison,
okay,
I would have thought it was very similar.
One of the things you say in your statement, this is back to the end of it, where you're asked about, you were asked before you did your statement about the list of staff who were disciplined after Panorama, and you say that there were members of staff at Brook House that you would witness displaying attitudes and behaviours that
What is
didn't.
this?
This is paragraph 68 again, sorry. The second sentence, you say there were members of staff at Brook House that you would witness displaying attitudes and behaviour that I did not agree with. For example, verbally aggressive behaviour. Do you remember which members of staff?
No. I think I said it in there. I do not recall specific details of the incidents.
And what do you mean by verbally aggressive? I mean, I know you can't remember exact things, but what sort of thing are we talking about?
Probably swearing, that
At
sort of
detainees.
language, yeah, I would have thought, yeah.
Shouting?
Raised voice, I wouldn't say shouting.
Okay. Any racism
No.
towards detainees? Sexism?
No.
Homophobia?
No.
Okay. I want to come on to the issue of mental health. You've said a couple of times in your statement that you didn't feel that you were adequately trained to deal with the mental health of detainees. Is that right?
Yeah.
At paragraph 10 of your statement, you say that there were so many people there that needed to be in hospital, in my opinion. It was not a suitable place for them to be. You would have people starving themselves or self-harming, and then you say that the only thing you'd be able to do is put them on E-wing so they could be watched more closely. And were you, I mean, you're talking there about so many people that needed to be in hospital. Were you aware of any way in which you could say to, whether it's healthcare or a manager, you know, this guy needs to be in hospital, he shouldn't be in here?
No.
Did you ever do that?
No.
It was just something you thought?
Yeah, it was just, I mean, the people that were that vulnerable were normally on E-wing, so staff would be aware of it. Managers would be aware of it, that they're obviously not mentally stable enough to be in there, if that's the right words to say.
Okay.
Yeah, but nothing was done about it.
And presumably then you never raised any concerns with healthcare, with any nurses or doctors or anything?
No.
You say that healthcare would visit, but there was no one really assessing whether people were mentally stable enough to be in there, and say that you think that a lot of detainees should have been formally assessed to be established whether they were safe to stay at Brook House. Are you referring to being formally assessed before they came in, or whilst they were in, or both?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Yes,
Sorry.
so one of the things you say at paragraph 34 of your statement is, I think lots of the detainees should have been formally assessed to establish whether they were safe to stay at Brook House.
Yeah, I was talking about as they come in. I mean, they should
Prior to coming in, yeah.
I think they should have been assessed properly. Because if they was, then they wouldn't have been allowed in there.
And were you aware of Home Office policies intended to ensure that people who were unfit for detention weren't admitted?
Sorry, say that again. Sorry.
Yeah. So obviously people who are admitted to Brook House and other detention centres, it's although it's run by G4S, it's the Home Office who have overall control. Were you aware of any Home Office policies for
No.
formally assessing?
No.
No. And do you think that, I mean, this, you may not know, but this inquiry knows that there are policies in place, but is it your view that any policies to assess whether people were fit for detention weren't working?
Yeah, they wasn't working at all.
Did you know of any way that you could refer someone to a doctor to be assessed?
No.
And were you familiar with the concept of a Rule 35 report? Does that mean anything to you?
No.
If someone came to you and said they had been tortured before they came into Brook House, would you know what to do with that information?
Probably tell the manager, just tell the manager. And then, yeah, that's what you normally do.
Okay. One of the things you say is that we've already talked about how you said the E-wing was sort of the only place you could put people who were particularly vulnerable. But one of the things you also say is the E-wing was used to put people who misbehaved. Is that right?
Yeah.
Now, I think we've understood from other witnesses that you've got E-wing and you've got the CSU.
Yes.
They're next to each other, but they're meant to be separate. Was that your understanding?
Yep.
And so, am I right in thinking that the vulnerable detainees were meant to be on E-wing, and the people who had allegedly misbehaved are meant to be in the CSU?
Yeah, they would go into CSU, and then they would, after they finished in CSU, they'd come onto E-wing for a certain amount of time before being released back to the wings.
Wing.
Yeah.
Did you have any concerns about those groups of people, you know, the most vulnerable and the people that had behavioural issues mixing together?
I mean, I didn't have any concerns, no, as I never really worked there, so I didn't see it.
Okay.
But yeah, it's obviously not right.
One of the things you've said in your statement is that you had no training on how to deal with serious mental health issues and instances of self-harm. Does that include both before your employment and during as well?
Yeah.
Did you have any training on dealing with self-harm and suicidal behaviour?
Just basic first aid.
Okay. Any training or talks on how to support people with PTSD?
No.
Would you have known anything about PTSD at the time?
No.
Were you taught about opening ACDTs?
No.
Do you remember what ACDTs are?
It's sort of, you write logs about the detainee, I think. I'm not really sure.
Yeah, so I mean, we can tell you, so
Yeah,
ACDTs are that you would open for a vulnerable person and anyone who had mentioned anything to do with self-harm or food refusal, for example.
That's right. And you write log in when they eat and if they don't eat and stuff like that.
Yeah, and we've heard evidence from people who were doing the observations, and did you ever do those observations on people?
I would have done some, yeah.
But and would you have known of the facility to actually open the ACDT in the first place?
No.
Okay. Yeah, one of the things you say is that you could open the ACDT if someone was refusing to eat, but it was only really taken seriously if something had actually happened to the person. That's what you say at paragraph 21 of your statement, if we can bring that up. Yeah, so you say if you had concerns about someone, for example, refusing to eat, you would open an ACDT, then they'd be checked every mealtime. The managers would have to sign off on the ACDT so they would be aware of the issue. My experience was it was only really taken seriously if something had actually happened to the person, because there were so many people in there dealing with these sorts of issues. What do you mean by something actually happening? Are you talking about the difference between someone threatening with self-harm and actually doing it?
Yeah, possibly.
How did, in your experience, staff see the issue of self-harm?
How serious was it?
Yeah, like how seriously did you take it?
Personally,
and your colleagues?
I'd never really come across it, to be honest with you. Like, first hand, you'd hear about stuff.
So you never came across a detainee self-harming?
Very rarely. Because obviously, when you're in the IT room or the library, and first response goes on, you're not supposed to leave this wing staff without first response night activities. But yeah, would have obviously taken it seriously.
Was there ever any discussion about people self-harming amongst staff?
Not that I'm aware of.
one of the things you say in your statement is that when an individual self-harms, first aid would be the priority, but am I right in thinking that you didn't actually have any experience of
I don't
of
think
that?
I did first aid on anyone in there.
And maybe already know the answer to this, but the inquiry's received some evidence from detained people saying that self-harm incidents were responded to by use of force rather than as a clinical issue.
Okay.
Do you have any experience of that?
No.
I'm now going to take you on, Mr. Lake, to some issues in relation to attitudes towards detainees in some specific instance. First of all, in relation to some comments made on the 19th of April. If we can turn up on screen, please, TRN 0000036. If we can go to page 5 once that's up, please. Just to give you the context for this, Mr. Lake, this is a transcript of a video diary that Callum Tully would do at the end of each shift,
Okay.
whilst he was filming. So it's not a record of anything you said, it's a record of what he said at the end of the day to his producer. I'll just wait for page 5. There we go. So, again, to avoid having to read the whole thing out and to summarise, this is Callum Tully talking on the 19th of April, and he says that you and Dan Small were talking about a bed watch you'd been on for a detainee who'd been on hunger strike for 6 weeks. He says that the detainee wasn't in very good condition, and that you and Dan Small had been openly talking about how you were eating a feast or a banquet in front of the detainee, and that there was then laughter between you. Do you remember this? Do you remember talking about a feast or a banquet in front of a detainee on hunger strike?
No, I don't even remember doing the bed watch.
Okay. Paragraph 44 of your statement, you say that if you did make the remarks, they absolutely aren't appropriate and you're truly sorry. Yeah.
If I did say the remarks, yeah.
I mean, given that this is Callum Tully talking at the same day about what happened, there's presumably no reason they would make that up.
Well, like I say, I can't remember it, but if I did say it, then obviously it's wrong. But yeah.
One of the ways you explain, if you did in fact say it in your statement, is you say it was a toxic culture in which it was usual for staff to use inappropriate banter to deal with stress. Did that ever extend to actually mocking detainees in your experience?
Not that I can remember, no.
Okay. One of the things Callum Tully says in his in this recording, actually over the next page, says that it was sad for me personally because Dan Lake's not been in the job that long, and when I first met him he was really quite a sweet guy, and I didn't think he would come out with something like that, and I've virtually become friends with him in ways, and today what he said was quite horrific and I didn't enjoy hearing it and filming it. Do you think that your approach, the way you saw detainees, changed through the period you were at Brook House?
I think you just not change. No, I don't know what the right words are to say really. The longer you're there, the more you don't want to be there, so the less effort you put in. If that makes sense.
I mean, yesterday, Dan Small talked about Brook House having sort of made him racist. Now, we're not talking about racism in this occasion, but did you feel that Brook House had an effect on the way that you perceived detainees, the level of respect you had for them, for example?
Yeah.
Do you think that decreased during
Yeah.
the time you were there? Coming on to some other comments on a different day. On this, firstly on the 27th of May. If we can turn that at TRN 0000087, please, at page 19. And share that's at tab 15 of your bundle.
Thank you.
again, while this is coming up, just to explain the context, so this is a transcript of a recording that Callum Tully made on the 27th of May, and it's a conversation between you and Callum Tully about a guy who we refer to as D1914. And in this conversation, there's a mention by you in the top half of the page that this detained person had already had 3 triple bypasses and already had a heart attack. And do you remember this?
No.
Okay, well, I'm going to ask you some questions about it anyway, because
Okay.
we've got the transcript. This is talking about someone who's about to be removed, and you've mentioned that he's got a medical condition, he's booked in for another bypass, and then you say a triple bypass. Callum Tully says, I can tell you he's had triple bypasses, he's already had a heart attack. And you say he's booked in for another, the doctor said we can use force on him. You say, I don't know, it could tits up if he fucking drops, bruv. Does that suggest to you that you had some concern that this detainee would come to harm during the use of force?
Yeah, reading this, yeah.
And if we go further down the page at line 673 there, you say that he claims, he'll fake having a heart attack. Do you remember why you thought he might fake having a heart attack?
I don't know. I don't remember it, but if he was to fake it, probably to get out of the removal or whatever they're trying to do to him.
And
possibly.
do you accept that, given this is a guy who you've described as already having had 3 triple heart passes, or a triple heart bypass, that suggesting that he'd fake a heart attack is undermining his condition?
Yeah.
Did you have a general belief that detainees might fake health problems?
Yeah.
You did. Why did you think they might do that?
Just because it had been done.
How did you know that?
Because nothing would happen after. When you stop the CNR, it would just, everything would be normal.
And why did you think they were faking it?
To either postpone their removal or any reason.
If
like you say, no one likes CNR, so.
And if so does that mean that because you'd had it before and because you thought that this might happen, that if somebody said they had a health issue, they said they were having a heart attack, or they said something was happening, your instinct would be they might be faking it?
It should be taken seriously. But obviously this is just me and Callum talking. But obviously it's not down to us to make that decision. I mean, we're just talking about it before, like, I looked at just me and Callum in the office. But ultimately it would be down to whoever's running the CNI if we go in or not, regardless of what we said.
But if you thought that somebody might be faking something, presumably that might make you respond less seriously to it.
But no, I'd still do what you have to do. I wouldn't be like, if I was told it was okay and the doctors have said it's okay, then it's okay.
Okay, still on this page, further down, Callum Tully says, we'll see what happens, and you say, it's recorded that you say, if he dies, he dies. Can you explain why you said that?
No, I don't remember saying that.
This is a transcript that records you having said it. We've also heard evidence of other officers using that phrase at other times. Do you remember that being a common phrase?
I've heard it around, yeah, but I don't remember saying it.
Do you remember where it comes from or anything like that?
No, just the culture of Brook House.
And do you accept that saying that about a detainee with heart problems is a pretty callous thing to have said?
Yeah,
okay.
If I said it.
Okay. Now, the transcript, although part of it's redacted, suggests that you had accessed D1914's criminal convictions, his criminal record, and that you discussed it with Callum Tully. Do you remember that?
No.
Okay, well, we can see that you, at paragraph 54 of your statement, you talk about this. You say, I'm asked whether I accept using language including nonce and murderer to describe D1914. Transcript indicates it was another officer who used the term nonce, and DCO Tully referred to him as a murderer. I cannot confirm whether or not I used this language. If I did, it was entirely inappropriate. It was used in the context of a private conversation. But you say, it appears that we, DCO Tully and myself, had accessed D1914's criminal history on the database. Do you remember how you would do that?
Just on the system, you could write in. They carry ID cards with them, and if you type in their names or their numbers, it would come up with all their history.
And when were you meant to do that, or when were you allowed to do that?
You could do it whenever you want. No one told you couldn't do it.
Okay. When would you do it?
When would I do it?
Yeah.
Probably when we was in the library, I would have thought, because the IT room, the computers were too slow to even load that.
And why would you do it?
I don't know, just to have a look, I suppose, be nosy.
Okay. So there was no nothing to prevent you from accessing this information,
No.
or no policy that you knew of that
No.
said you shouldn't access it? And did learning about the criminal records of detainees, did that affect the way you treated them?
Not really, no.
Now, we don't have the transcript of this, but at paragraph 52 of your statement, we've already talked about the comment about feigning a heart attack, and then halfway down the page you say, I accept that I used the phrase "give him a right hook, mate" in response to DCO Tully's safety concerns. This was meant as a joke between colleagues. I did not mean it literally. I accept that this remark, however intended, was inappropriate, and I apologise for any offence caused. Yeah?
Yeah.
Was discussion of using violence towards detained people normal?
No.
Do you think that's the only occasion you did it?
I can't even remember this, but yeah.
And you've seen the footage, and it was Callum Tully saying that he was worried about D1914, and you said, give him a right hook, mate.
Yeah, it was just, like you say, just talking to Callum in the office, that's all it was. Just banter with Callum.
I mean, you've talked in your statement a few times about this macho culture that was there, but do you not think that using words like that is you contributing to that macho culture?
Yeah, because you get sucked into whatever culture is, you just adapt to the situation. Everyone was the same.
So you think you were saying this to fit in?
Yeah, basically, yeah.
Okay. And you say that you wouldn't have meant that seriously?
No.
Would you have ever condoned giving a detainee a
No.
right hook?
Never.
I want to move on to ask about another incident, this time on the 31st of May. If we can get up on screen TRN 0000079. And at page 10, please. This is a conversation that you had with Dan Small and Callum Tully on the 31st of May. I already asked Dan Small about this yesterday, and it's a discussion where Dan Small says that he wouldn't go to Cleveland because it's black central, and says too many blacks, it's 80% black. In your statement, Mr. Lake, you say that you would have taken these comments to be workplace banter. What do you mean by that?
Just not serious.
Were these sort of comments common?
Not around me, no, not that I can remember.
Were you surprised by these sort of comments?
No.
I mean, you had black colleagues. You were meant to be responsible for a lot of black people in Brook House. Did that not alarm you?
Not really, because I say it was normal. Yeah.
Now, towards the bottom of the page, it records you saying he couldn't have said that at a worse time. The only black worker in here walked past. And then the discussion about whether the guy that walked past is black or not. Given given that you're saying you couldn't have said that at a worse time because a black officer walked past, that suggests that you knew it was a wrong thing to say, doesn't it?
Yeah.
You knew it was a racist thing to say.
Yeah.
And why wouldn't you report a racist thing from Dan Small?
Reporting never happened in Brook House.
Would it have even occurred to you to report it?
No.
Would it have occurred to you to challenge him using those sort of words? Would you ever have done that?
No.
Do you see the potential issue with a load of staff who are responsible for responsible for hundreds of detained people, many of whom are black, talking about black people in this way? And so looking back on it, do you see that as a problem?
Yeah.
But you didn't see that at the time?
No.
This might just be a disconnect, but in your statement you say that you can't remember the details of any specific instance of racism, homophobia or misogyny by any member of staff.
Yeah.
This is an example of racism.
Yeah, I said I don't remember in the first set of questions, and you come back with these afterwards, and obviously now I've seen it, but I didn't remember it to start with, no.
Understood. Okay. And I'm going to come on to now ask a few comments you made about force use by staff. If we can turn first on the screen to TRN 0000095. At page 32, please. That's tab 14, Chair, if that helps. Mr. Lake, this is a conversation between you and Dan Small, and it's about a comment you made. This is on the 13th of May. And you say, on B-Wing, that geezer bit his hand. Do you remember they wrapped it up in the office? That geezer bit Derek's hand, and then he bent over, and Derek uppercutted him and cracked him straight in the jaw. And afterwards, Jules comes up. He was like, what happened to his lip? His lip was all over the place, nice. And Derek was like, I don't know. I saw everything. He was undoubted. Derek just went smack. Oh dear, just to make sure I'll be back. Derek is Derek Murphy in that conversation?
I would have thought so, yeah.
And Jules Williams?
I don't remember Jules Williams.
Jules Williams was the residential manager.
Okay.
Don't remember?
I don't remember him, no.
Okay. Now, when you were asked about this in your statement, you say that you can't now recall the incident, and therefore you're not sure whether you witnessed it directly or whether you were told by another officer. But the transcript records you saying at row 1047, I saw everything. So do you accept that suggests it is likely you saw this?
I don't remember seeing it, no.
Do you think that if you had seen a member of staff uppercut someone straight in the jaw, that's something you would have remembered?
Possibly, yeah.
And this is, do you have any idea when you were talking about this happening? You're talking about on the 31st of May?
No. I don't remember the incident, no.
I mean, we've heard quite a lot of evidence about alleged assaults at Brook House, but this is a suggestion that a member of staff uppercutted and cracked someone in the jaw, leading to his lip being all over the place, I think it said. That would be quite a serious thing to be describing, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I know you say you can't remember it now, but thinking quite hard about it.
I have thought about it.
Okay. And you still can't remember? No. If you had seen it, do you accept that it's something that you should have reported?
Yes.
And if you had seen it, do you think it's something you would have reported?
No.
Now, one of the things that's in the bundle, I don't know whether you've had the chance to read it, we had evidence from Owen Syred
the new
back
stuff.
in December, yeah.
Okay, no, I've not read it.
Okay.
Or briefly in the room.
Okay, if we can have that up on screen, please. It's at INQ 000101. first of all, do you remember Owen Sirod, the
No.
welfare officer?
No.
Okay. We may not get... It's page 31 of this document.
Can't read that.
I think. Yeah, page 31. Given that you can't remember Owen Sirod, and given that you can't remember the incident, we may not go very far with this, but Owen Sirod describes an incident where he saw Derek Murphy uppercut somebody as well. Do you have any idea whether that's the same incident?
No, I don't remember who Owen is.
Okay. I mean, he describes the incident, just to summarise, as there was a detained guy who tried to punch him on Sirod. It's at the bottom of the page, sorry.
I can't read this.
Yeah, it's going to get a bit bigger. Sorry.
Okay, thank you.
I'm just going to summarise it again, but he describes this incident where this detained person tried to punch him on Sirod, clipped his face. Spontaneous incident happened. The officers in the wing took control of him. He was angry. Someone called first response. If we could move over to the next page, please. Top half of the page on the left-hand side. And it says, so a designated team would be called out. First officer that came in was Derek Murphy. The detained guy had his head facing the wing door. Derek Murphy came in very low and uppercut a couple of times, I think 2 or 3 times in the face, and I intervened, and then he talks about how he had that conversation with him. And obviously the language that's used here, both of you use the term uppercut, which is quite a specific form of punching somebody.
Yeah, I understand that.
Do you have any recollection
No.
of whether that's the same incident? No?
No.
None at all. Okay. Now, one of the things you say in your statement when you were asked about this incident that you described with Derek Murphy is that on reflection you realise you should have reported it. Your reason for failing to report it is the general culture of non-reporting. But the way that you described it, this guy Jules had come in as well, but do you remember that at all?
No.
Okay.
Don't remember Jules.
If we can turn up TRN 0000079 at page 20, please. This is a conversation on the 31st of May, so a couple of weeks after you described that incident with Derek Murphy. And this is a conversation between you and Callum Tully, and you refer to speaking with someone who had been on training, and that person had said to you, "I'm not a snitch, I'm not a grass, I'd never grass." And you say, which is, to be fair, everyone would do that, he said, "I'm not a grass at all. He said he's alright, to be fair. He's a good lad." Were you saying that he was a good lad because he wouldn't snitch on someone?
I don't know how it was said. I mean, the way you read it is obviously different to how you say it. I don't know what context I would have said it in.
I mean, if you can't remember it exactly, then let's try and sort of think about it more hypothetically then. A new member of staff says to you, "I'm not a grass, I'm not a snitch." How would you react to that?
Fair play.
Did you think that was a good thing, that people wouldn't snitch?
Yeah, that's the environment it was like in there, yeah. You don't grass on people.
And looking back on it, do you think that was a good thing?
Looking back on it, no.
Okay.
Definitely not.
Why not?
Because you could have prevented a lot of situations.
But you feel like there was a culture of not grassing or snitching with fellow officers?
Yeah.
And do you accept that you fed into that culture as well?
Yeah.
Another set of comments I want to ask you about, TRN 0000080. At page 16, and then going over to the next page. Again, I'm not going to read all of this out because I only want to ask you about part of it, and so I want to sort of take bits out. This is a conversation on the 5th of June 2017.
This one of the new documents you put in on Thursday.
I think so. Well, I think we put them in earlier, but you only got them on Thursday.
I never got them.
Okay. Well, we can ask you about them now anyway. So this is a record of a conversation between you, Dan Small, and Callum Tully. Just before we actually get into the specifics, there's obviously quite a lot of records of conversations between the three of you. Were the three of you?
We worked together with all activities, yeah. So when we was on shift, we was in a shift as a three.
Okay. Now you are talking here about somebody called Darren, who we think is Darren Tomsett. Do you remember him?
No.
Okay. Talks about a guy called Darren, and there's a description here about Darren Tomsett having a go at a detained person, losing the plot, saying that he went nuts, and you describe him as a fucking nutter. You describe an incident where Darren was looking at someone and he said, "Do you want to kiss me?" or something. Out of nowhere, "Do you want to fucking kiss me?" And you say, "Literally," and that's Dan Small saying that. He says, "Literally, what the fuck is going on?" And you say, "He's the sort of guy I might have said to you, he'll go home, and when the TV remote runs out of battery, he'll argue with that and all. He's a fucking nutter, bro. He's completely lost the plot." Do you remember the person you're talking about at all?
No, I don't remember him, no.
I mean, does it surprise you that you'd be talking about a colleague in those terms?
To that extreme, yeah. But I can't remember who he is. Darren who?
Well, we think it's
name?
Darren Tomsett, but obviously not for us to say.
Yeah.
One of the things you also say in this transcript is that, just trying to find it on the page, but you say that it's at the bottom, line 362. You say, "Yeah, definitely." Oh, sorry, Dan Small asks what he does is he'll argue with them and then bin them off, and you say, "Yeah, definitely." He winds them up and sends them out. Any idea what that means?
I would have thought I'd wind someone up and then leave the wing, leave it with someone else.
Because we've heard evidence from a number of detainees that some staff members would deliberately provoke people so that they had to, so there was a justification for using force on people. Is that something you ever experienced?
No.
Okay, I'm going to move on to the next issue, which is some comments you made on the 14th and 15th of June. If we can look at TRN 0000093. At page 27, please. Now, I'm going to read a bit more of this out. This is a discussion between you and Callum Tully about what happened between Sean Sayers, and you'll be aware of this issue because this came up after Panorama. You start describing what happened at line 973. You say he called Sean a fat cunt, and Sean went, "Do something about it then." And then he came over like he was going to hit Sean. Sean grabbed him and threw him in his room, went into his room and went bang at it. You go on to say Sean picked him out. That's at line 983. Sean picked him out. I was standing next to Sean, and Sean had him picked up. Sean had him picked him up like this in a bear hug, and then it records that you imitated wrapping your arms around the back of someone, threw him in his room, and then at line 987 you say backhanded him and locked him in. Further down the page, at line 994, Callum Tully asks you, did he give him a proper smack? And you reply, yeah, backhander right on his face. Callum Tully asks why Sean did it, and you say angry, called him a fat cunt. And then towards the bottom of the page, there's a discussion about whether this took place on camera, and you say right there, and Callum Tully says backhand him across the face on camera, And you say, no, picked him up on camera, carrying him to his room. And if we turn to the next page, you say, threw him in his room, backhanded him in his room. But it did look like, to be fair on Sean, it looked like he was going to hit Sean, like the way he approached Sean with his hands back like this. Now, when you were asked about this, Mr. Lake, you say that you accept that the transcript accurately records the conversation,
Yeah.
and you don't dispute, obviously, what you said to Callum Tully because it's here in black and white. But to the best of your recollection, you don't actually recall DCO Sayers hitting the detainee.
Went through this loads after it, when I was being interrogated about it, and I didn't remember it then, and I don't remember it now.
So you were asked about it in September 2017 after Panorama, and you said you didn't remember being there, but you'd accept from this that it looks like you were there.
Reading that, yeah.
Yeah. And given the way that you describe it, and this is obviously the day, I think it's the same day that it happened, presumably you'd accept that that's probably the best evidence of what you saw.
Well, I don't remember seeing it, no. I don't remember it.
Can you, so what you've described is that Sean Sayers bear hugged him, lifted him up, put him in the room, and then backhanded him. Can you think of any reason why you would say that Sean Sayers backhanded him if he hadn't done that?
No.
So do you think the most likely thing is that you did see Sean Sayers backhanded?
No, and I'm not just going to randomly turn around now and be like, yeah, I saw it.
I appreciate that you don't remember it.
It's just this has gone on so long about this one incident, and I don't remember it at all.
Again, we talked a little bit about this in the context of the Derek Murphy thing in terms of uppercutting someone and you not remembering it. This is you describing a big officer. I think Sean Sayers is a big guy. He's described somewhere elsewhere as being a 20-stone guy. If you'd seen him backhand somebody, is that something you think you'd remember?
Probably, yeah.
So do you think the most likely thing from reading this is that you did see him backhand him or you didn't see him backhand him?
I don't remember. I'm not going to say I did see it when I don't remember seeing it.
You did? Do you remember seeing him bear hug him and lift him into the room?
No, but I didn't even remember. When I got interviewed after it, I couldn't even remember I didn't remember I was on the wing. They showed me, I think they said they showed me video footage of me on the wing, but I didn't even remember being on the wing at the time.
Okay. Generally, and I appreciate this is a long time ago now, but generally is your memory of this time?
I've done the last 4 or 5 years everything possible to forget about the place. And then this randomly comes up, and then you ask me to remember certain days, certain times. Okay. And I think I've done well to remember what I have remembered.
Okay. But I appreciate that we're talking a long time ago, but we are talking about quite extreme instance, I think you'd agree. The idea of uppercutting someone, backhanding someone.
Yeah, it doesn't mean it'll stay in your mind, though. Okay. Things happen in work and out of work that would, take your mind off of certain things. And this place doesn't stay in my mind at all. Yeah.
Okay. You remember from the disciplinary investigation afterwards that you were shown footage that suggested you'd been in the room with Sean Sayers for 13 seconds. Isn't it? You remember that?
Something like that.
Yeah, but you don't remember what happened in the room at that time?
No.
Okay. Now, one of the things you were asked, and you commented about this, was about whether you completed a use of force statement or anything like that, and you said you wouldn't have done because you didn't use force.
Yeah.
Was your understanding that you only had to complete a use of force form if you yourself used force?
That was my understanding, yeah.
So, and again, I appreciate this is asking you to think back, and it's more generally, but if you saw someone hitting a detainee, was it your understanding there was no paperwork that you had to complete?
I wouldn't have filled anything out. Not that I was aware of, anyway.
No incident report?
I was never told to fill out anything like that, no.
Do you know about SIRs, serious incident reports?
I think they go to security, right?
Yeah.
I think.
Did you ever complete them?
No.
Now, I appreciate you can't remember what happened or you say you can't remember what happened on this day, and you say the same in relation to the Derek Murphy incident. But that's you describing 2 incidents of staff members assaulting or allegedly assaulting detainees. even if you can't remember the specific instance, can you help us with why that kind of behaviour might be occurring at Brook House?
I mean, going by this transcript, the detainee is obviously verbally abusing, so I guess it's a reaction.
Do you think officers felt provoked?
Possibly, yeah.
Okay. And just very briefly, so after so Panorama is broadcast in August or early September 2017. You say that it had a very damaging impact on staff morale, yeah?
Yeah.
And everyone became very suspicious of one another. One of the things you say at paragraph 63 of your statement is that there was a feeling that detainees felt empowered, and this impacted on your ability to maintain control. Did you see it as a bad thing that detainees would feel empowered?
In an environment like that, yeah.
Do you think it was better that they felt powerless?
Not powerless, no. It's got to be level ground.
And what do you mean by empowered? Why did they feel empowered?
Well, because obviously the whole centre was what happened. They just, you felt like they had control of the centre because of it.
And just very briefly, so I'm not going to go through each of the documents, but we know that you were investigated about the failure to report the Sean Sayers incident, and that led to a disciplinary hearing, following which you were issued with a written warning, yeah? And it was put to you that as part of the investigation report, there was a finding that your inability to record the detail was suspicious, and you were evasive and unhelpful during the interview. What do you say about that?
It wasn't an interview, it was an interrogation.
Okay. Do you feel like the process was unfair?
100%. They were just trying to make you say what they wanted to hear, basically. Put words in your mouth, and yeah, it was awful. That's why it probably says I was a bit, not long with them, because you felt backed into a corner. Then you had to fight out of it.
And obviously was there a sort of collective feeling amongst staff that you were all under attack essentially at that stage?
Definitely.
And did you feel like you had to protect other officers?
No. And like I say now, I've not seen any of these guys since then. I don't owe them anything. If I was to turn around now and say, yeah, Derek and Sean done that, it makes no difference in my life whatsoever. But I'm not willing to sit here and say, yeah, I saw it when I don't remember seeing it.
Sure.
And I think that's fair.
And I appreciate that's the position now, but trying to go back to September 2017, do you think you might have been trying to protect them at that stage?
No.
Okay. Now, you say in your statement that the disciplinary process had a profoundly negative effect on you, and it led to you, or it was part of the reason you say you were signed off with stress afterwards, yeah? Do you have any explanation as to why it had that effect on you?
Just anxiety. Just didn't want to be there. I don't think I returned to normal duties.
Yeah, I think you say that you were signed off for 6 weeks, returned on light duties, and then shortly thereafter you left Brook House. You say that the stressful workplace environment, the long hours, and the travel time were too much for you at that time in your life.
And just had a baby as well.
And those reasons for leaving the stressful environment, the long hours and the travel time, we heard similar reasons from Dan Small yesterday, and he left at a similar time. Were you guys, you said that you were working together a lot. Was that something that you both decided together?
No,
Remember?
we both went our separate ways.
It's individual decisions, just for the same reasons?
Yeah.
Okay. Chair, I've got no further questions for this witness.
Thank you very much. I have 2 questions for you, Mr. Lake. One, relating to something that you mentioned about search teams searching in cells for drugs. Did you, from your recollection, were you ever involved in, as a member of the search team?
I think I did 1 or 2, yeah.
Did you have specific training on that in your initial training course?
What, searching?
Yeah.
Minimal. But, you're sitting in a classroom, it's different to searching someone's room. I can't remember exactly, but it might have just been like a bag you had to search or something silly like that. Nothing to the scale of what you would be doing in there.
So when you carried out your first search of a cell, how were you shown what to do? Was it kind of an on-the-job training?
Yeah.
Somebody just show you how to do it?
Yeah.
Another question just in relation to searches, this time searches of staff as they were entering the centre. Can you remember how often you were searched and what that search was like?
I can remember once going in, and it was just a pat down.
By another
just a
member
very
of staff?
basic, yeah. A guy that was on my training course, I believe.
Okay, thank you. One other question. You talked about the number of staff who would complete their training and then start working and then would very quickly leave again. Obviously, that wasn't the case for all staff. Some staff did stay. Were there any differences between the sort of people who did stay and the sort of people that did leave? Anything that you could kind of describe to us?
I personally would never see them, because obviously not being on the wings and activities, there was no spaces and activities. It was full. So I just personally think it was not sold to them how they thought. They thought they were going to something completely different. That's all. And the people that did stay quickly moulded into the culture and everything of Brook House. No one come with any different thoughts or ideas.
So did you feel that there was that people that stayed were just able to adapt to what the culture was, and the people that couldn't do that were the ones that perhaps left? Is that
possibly?
Would that be fair?
Yeah.
Okay, they're my only questions. Thank you very much, Mr. Lee.
That concludes Mr. Lake's evidence. Chair, I invite you to have a 15-minute break now, and then we'll return with Steve Lawton at 11:40.
Indeed, thank you. Thank you for coming to give evidence. I know it's not an easy experience, but it's been important to hear from you, so thank you.
No worries.
Thank you. We'll return at 11:40. Thank you, Mr. Livingston. you.
Thank you, Chair. We now have the evidence of Mr. Lawton.
If you could repeat after me, please. I swear by Almighty God
I swear by Almighty God
that the evidence I shall give
that the evidence I shall give
shall be the truth,
shall be the truth,
the whole truth,
the whole truth,
and nothing but the truth.
and nothing but the truth. Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Lawton.
Morning.
Could you confirm your full name for us, please?
Stephen Mark Lawton.
You should have a bundle of documents in front of you in that folder, which
Yep.
I may refer you to, or I may show them on the screen, which is in front of you.
Okay.
And at tab 1 of that bundle is your witness statement, which you made to the inquiry and signed on the 18th of February 2022. You might wish to have that open as we go through, so it's just behind the first tab if you use the one in the bundle. Chair, I will ask for that to be adduced in full, and the reference for that is SER 000447.
Thank you, Mr.
What that means, Mr. Lawton, is that we won't go over everything that you've said in your statement today. That's already in your evidence. We'll just focus on some of the key issues. So first as to work history, which you set out in your statement at paragraph 1. I understand you spent 10 years at Gatwick Airport as a ground handling agent, and then you joined Brook House in early 2009, first as a DCO.
That's correct.
Brook House hadn't opened then, had it? So it
No.
was empty. So
Yeah.
you could do your training within the centre.
We did, yes.
And you've been there from the start, effectively.
From day one, yes.
Later in 2009, or perhaps early 2010, you became a DCM.
Later on, September 2009, I believe, yeah.
And then in 2018, you became an E1 grade. And you've helped us with what that is. It's between a DCM role and a senior management role.
That's
Is that
correct.
right? And 2019, you were seconded to a D2 grade job, which is a senior management role. And 2020, effectively, you had a role at that level which became permanent. Is that right? As a
Yes.
member of the senior management team.
Yeah.
So now you're with Serco, who've taken over the contract, and you're still at Brook House, and you're now an assistant director.
Correct.
So tracing it back, during the relevant period, which is the middle of 2017, you were a DCM.
Yes.
You say at paragraph 3 that you were a manager on the wings, and then you became an Oscar 1.
Yep.
Was that one wing or various wings that you were managing?
I managed D wing at the time, but I could be covering other wings as well.
And do you remember when you became an Oscar 1?
2012, 13 maybe.
And you say in your statement at 3, the culture was fine on the wings, but it did get worse when I became Oscar 1.
Yeah.
So was that around that time that you
Yeah.
think that it started to become worse? And the reason that you give is staffing levels and the centre being quite full most of the time.
It was, yeah.
Was that related to, I suppose not if it was 2013, it wasn't related to the 60-bed expansion, it was just generally a full centre, lots of detainees.
We were generally at near capacity, yes.
And at 6B, you give more detail. You mention the lack of managers and staff during the relevant period. So now we're talking about 2017.
Staffing was low.
And in 2018, January 2018, you were interviewed by Miss Lampard and Mr. Marsden for the Verita investigation into the events
Yeah.
that were shown on Panorama. We have the notes of that interview at VER 000270. I won't show them on the screen. But you were asked about staffing, and you said, if you'd have asked me 2 months ago, I would have said, if I can be totally honest with you, it's bordering on dangerous.
It was.
2 months before your interview, so November 2017, so after Panorama. Why did you think it was dangerous?
The staffing levels were really low. You had 4 wings. You often had 2 DCOs looking after that wing. A DCM could be looking after 2, 3 wings at the time. So the staffing levels were really low.
And so just to be very clear, although you said 2 months ago, it wasn't just that it became low after Panorama. Did you think it was low even before then,
Yes.
so during the relevant period?
Yeah.
And you mentioned one DCM, sometimes between 2 wings.
You'd have 1 DCM looking after 2 wings at one end of the building, 1 DCM looking after 2 wings at the other end of the building. But if that wasn't DCM, I've done it. I've at some days looked after all 4 wings.
So I think you're saying in your statement at 6B, if one of the DCMs was off sick, you'd effectively have one looking after all 4.
Yeah.
And we know that it's a sort of H shape, so they're quite far apart, and the one DCM might be 2 on the same side or might be all 4 all across the centre. How often would it be that a DCM was off sick, or for whatever reason not there, meaning one person had to do all 4?
I had to do all 4 quite regularly. It could be someone off sick, it could be someone on leave. I think one side of the shift had more staff than the other side of the shift. But normally you'd be looking after 2 wings, but on the occasion you could be looking after 4.
Once a month, once a week, once a year?
Every couple of months maybe.
And you say one side of the shift had more than others. Are you talking about days versus nights? Or sides?
No, you had different sides of the shift. So, so you already had someone on, so you had different sides. Normally your weekend, so if someone was working a weekend, the other side of the shift would be off that weekend.
Right. And your view at paragraph 30 is that 2 DCOs per wing, which was what the allocation was at the time, and you say that was for about 120 detainees or up to 120.
It wouldn't be 120 was the capacity, so you wouldn't have 120, but you could sometimes have 100 residents on the wing for two staff.
And you say at 30 that wasn't adequate to enable staff to perform all the functions of the role.
Correct.
You've described it, as we said in the Verita interview, as dangerous.
Borderline dangerous, it could be, yeah.
Dangerous to?
Staff and residents.
With understaffing, although perhaps this is a simplistic way to say it, either the company is willing to employ and pay people, but people don't want to work, so you can't get enough people to join, or rather maybe they leave, or the company is choosing not to spend the money to employ enough staff. Do you have a view on which one it was during the relevant period?
I wasn't involved in the recruitment or staffing levels. I just did my job on a daily basis.
And your observation was that there just weren't enough people, but you didn't know why?
Yeah.
In your Verita interview at page 14 of the copy that we have, you're discussing various members of the SNT, and you say in relation to Ben, which I understand must be Ben Saunders, because you're talking about the SNT during the relevant period.
He was the governor at the time, yeah.
I'll be honest with you, this is you speaking. In my eyes, Ben was a stats/graphs man. All he's worried about is hitting targets, making sure objectives were met. Very rarely you'd see him walking around the place. I shouldn't really say this, but I think he neglected the staff a bit. He wasn't interested in them. Do you think that's fair?
Fair enough, yeah.
And when you say he was interested in hitting targets, did you mean sort of complying with the contract?
Yes, which I didn't know a lot about at the time. I do now, but I didn't at the time. But yeah, that's what it seemed like.
So financial targets or targets
Contractual
around?
Targets.
Contractual targets. And you say, I shouldn't say this, but I think he neglected the staff a bit. Why does that equate to neglecting staff? Is it?
He wasn't visible. I mean, if you're in my opinion, if you're a governor of the centre, you should be out and about engaging with staff.
And has your view on that changed now that you're a member of the senior management team about, the need for visibility?
Yes.
It has changed, or that remains your view?
No, it has changed.
What's your view now?
But the S&T do get out and about, but they're doing a lot of work at the moment. We're more visible.
I see. So it still needs to be done, and now it is being done.
Yes.
Is that what you're saying? Fine. In your statement at paragraph 10, you say, talking about the relevant period, as a DCM, it was hard to support DCOs, not through a lack of wanting to, but because we did not have the time to support all their daily tasks. You say you always tried to support them, but it could be difficult due to pressures. And is that, again, affected by the amount of people who you had to care for versus the amount of staff you had to do it?
Well, if you're running one wing, you can spend more time with your staff so you can support them. But if you're, for say, like we spoke about earlier, if I was looking after 4 wings, it feels like you're being dragged for here, there, and it's even though you wanted to, it's more difficult to support your staff.
And you say at paragraph 11, I didn't formally report the fact that it was difficult to support DCOs at the time, but it wasn't secret. It was common knowledge within the SNT, but you might have mentioned it during your yearly development review.
That's correct, yeah.
And the reason that you didn't formally report it, was that because they already knew, or did you have any other
it wasn't a
reason?
secret.
How do you think the SNT knew about this when you say they weren't present on the wings?
But they still know the staffing levels.
How did they know about the effect of the staffing levels on the day-to-day?
Maybe the sickness went up. I don't know. There just wasn't enough. The bottom line is there wasn't enough staff at the time.
And the SNT knew this?
I assume so.
Your statement covers the impact of staffing levels on morale, and you mention stress and feeling overworked. You mention sickness levels, Did you mean that sickness levels caused by being overworked, or that they would cause understaffing because people are off sick?
A bit of both, really.
You say at 31 it was mentally draining.
Yeah.
And that often people couldn't have breaks because obviously they have to work to cover. And you say at paragraph 7 that the SMT were not visible to staff, which made it feel as though there was a them and us culture, and that staff were not properly supported. The them and us culture you're talking about there, the them is the SMT, is it? And the us is the people on the wings.
DOMs and DCOs, yeah.
So DOMs, known at the time as DCMs.
Sorry, DCMs, yeah. They're
problem.
DOMs now, they're DCMs.
Known now as DOMs.
Yeah.
So the people on the wing versus the SMT is the us and them you talk about.
Yes.
But nevertheless, there were at least friendship between staffs as within many workplaces.
Yes.
And that's the us, the DOMs and DCOs.
Yeah.
And you had friendships as well as working relationships with DCOs. And I think also at senior management level, you got on well with Jules Williams at least.
Yeah, he was my line manager for a time when I was on
When you were on residential.
residential, yeah.
You're asked to cover in your statement some issues raised by Michelle Brown in her Verita interview. She raised concerns or made comments, including that she'd been left short-staffed while a number of people had gone away at the same time. And I think I believe your answer is that she was exaggerating the number of people who were away at one time, and in any event, if there were staffing issues, the company doesn't sign off annual leave. So you don't approve leave unless you have enough people to cover.
Yeah, if you want time off, there's a procedure of booking your time off. I think the time that you're referring to is everyone had asked for leave, everyone got their leave approved.
Yep.
So that's the way of doing it, and it still is now.
And did Michelle Brown raise any issues around being left short-staffed with you at the time?
Not with me, no.
And were there any other issues which she appears to have had about you or your colleagues' actions, which she raised with you at the time?
She didn't raise it with me.
And did you feel it was an environment where you could raise concerns with the SMT if you needed to, or indeed where they would tell you if they had concerns?
Yes, I mean I was a DCM, so I could go and see the SMT if I thought I had to. But I also had my annual reviews with my line manager.
Is this where you'd normally kind of raise any general issues that have been affecting you over the year?
It'd be part of your review, you know, how are you getting on, is your development, are there any issues?
And I think you say the sort of things that you might have raised, although I know you can't remember specifically from 2017, are things like lack of being able to support your DCOs and staffing, and also the time served national foreign offenders sharing cells. So you've painted quite a negative picture in your Verita interview and in your statement to the inquiry and in front of us today about working at Brook House during the relevant period with regard to staffing levels at least, and morale being low. And a distant SMT or an SMT that it was hard for people to engage with. Was that feeling shared generally between DCOs and DCMs at the time?
I believe so.
Did anyone enjoy their work or feel positive about
I'm not saying they
day-to-day?
didn't enjoy their work, they felt under pressure. I mean, back in those days, the staffing levels were a lot lower than they are now. So everyone had a bit of a tight... You're spending 13.5-hour shifts. It's a lot of time to spend with the same people every day, day in, day out. So people were low, the morale was low, but the staff at the time did an amazing job for what they were doing and the resources they had to them.
As to the friendship groups which formed, would it be fair to say that there were cliques in Brook House? So groups who inevitably end up chatting together, having their breaks together, maybe socialising together more than with others?
No more than normal. I say you're working in the same place with people for that length of time, you're going to see more of them.
Was there a culture of looking out for each other in a difficult working environment?
Staff back then, they did look out for each other, I feel, yeah. You had to.
Was there a culture where perhaps friends or colleagues wouldn't grass on other colleagues if they saw something that concerned them, or wouldn't report it because of the friendships?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
And would you say that there was a laddish culture between you or between other staff at Brook House during the relevant period?
No.
I'm going to ask you about a couple of specific incidents now. So the first is related to D1527, and you were involved in an incident with D1527 on the 25th of April 2017. You were called up to his room by Callum Tully, who'd found him attempting to strangulate himself or with a ligature around his neck in any event. And that was in the toilet, and you were the person who used, I believe, a fish knife to cut off that ligature.
I wasn't called up there by Callum Tully, no.
Oh, so you were called up by, was it Mr. Fraser?
No, I wasn't called up by it. I was doing my
Sorry.
rounds.
Yep.
As an Oscar 1, I did my rounds. After dinner time, I did my rounds of all the wings to see if the staff were okay, to see if they'd had their breaks, and to check on the food refusals. I came onto E-Wing. I believe at the time D1527 was on a food refusal, so I checked to see if he'd had dinner. I made my way up to his room to see if there was any observations in his ACDT that he was currently on, because he was on constant supervision. When I got there, the officer on the door said he hadn't seen him. He hadn't seen him for a couple of minutes. So I went into the room and saw him in the toilet area with what appeared to be a ripped T-shirt around his neck.
I see. So no one called you there. You happened to be walking past. And the officer on the door was Clayton Fraser,
I believe so, yes.
Can we have a transcript on the screen, please? It's TRN 000001. Chair, you have this at tab 9. So we've seen the footage from this day earlier in the inquiry, and some of it appears on Panorama as well. Yep. And yesterday we heard from Clayton Fraser about his involvement. Mm-hmm. But turning to your involvement, you enter his wing, as you say. You see the ligature around his neck, which you cut off immediately. Yeah. Sorry, in his room on E-Wing.
Yeah.
You call for healthcare to attend immediately. I think pretty much you call healthcare. It's shown on the transcript, and then they duly do attend. If we turn to page 3, you realise that he's got a battery, I think. So second column, line 65, you say, he's got a battery, give me the battery. And then below that, 71, don't put it in your mouth. And then you say, he's got a battery in his mouth.
Yeah.
And then if you turn to page 4, please, when healthcare arrive, you tell them he tried to swallow a battery. Which is on the second column at 66. He tried to swallow a battery, he tried to swallow a phone battery, and that's you talking to Nurse Joe Buss, I believe. Mm-hmm. If you go to page 5, on line 5, Callum says, what is wrong, mate? I thought we were making a bit of progress yesterday. Then you address the detained person. Going down to line 24, you say, now what do we do? Just sit here all flipping night? You say, take the battery out of your mouth. And then at 36, it isn't going to get you off this wing, is it? And then at 42, when all we do is stuff like this, the longer you're going to stay in here. You're saying these things, I think, to the detained person, to D1527. Is it because you felt inconvenienced by what he'd done with the ligature and the battery?
Not inconvenience. I mean, I dealt with this particular resident prior to the incident. I mean, what happened is when I removed the ligature from his neck, I think you skipped a bit here. If you look at the footage, he started shouting quite aggressively in my face. So in my experience, I let them vent, so let him calm down, and then he calmed down. I knew this guy. It's not as if it's the first time I saw him, so I could speak to him, a sort of rapport I had with him. I could speak to him the way I did.
What do you mean by it isn't going to get you off this wing or out of this wing?
If I remember rightly, he wanted to go back to his previous wing. I mean, the reason he was down there because he was on a constant supervision, and I believe he was on Rule 40 at the time as well.
Did you think he was did the thing with the ligature and did the thing with the battery as a way to get moved rather than for any other reasons relating to his mental health, for example?
I don't think he did that to get moved. He was obviously the guy. He had issues. That's not normal behaviour to tie a ligature around your neck. It's not normal behaviour to put a battery in your mouth. But I spoke to him the way I did because that's, it's not the first time I spoke to him. I've had sat down and had conversations with this resident.
At 77 on the same page, you say he's running around all day, he is. And then you ask if he'll let the nurse talk to him. And if we turn the page at page 6, line 11, you comment could be a late one and all. Mm-hmm. You say that again at 22, could be a late one and all. And then at 33, the use of force flipping paperwork. And then something inaudible. So you're in the room still with D1527 at the time, and you're saying you're going to be there late completing use of force paperwork.
I could be, potentially, yeah.
Did you want him to know that you had been inconvenienced by what he'd done?
I don't think I was talking to him at the time. I may have been talking to another officer.
I think you are talking to another officer because it looks like it's Stafford too, but it's in front of the detained person.
Yeah.
Did you have any concerns about him hearing that you were saying it's going to be a late one and you have to complete all this paperwork?
Well, I don't see that as relevant. how would that concern him?
You might be thinking that you feel like all of this is just an inconvenience to you.
I don't agree with that.
The camera, as we now know, Mr. Tully was wearing it, is on D1527 in his room, and you're in there as well. And you're heard saying at the top of the second column there, not to, but while you're walking past and leaving the room in front of the detained person, something, a battery in his mouth, the cock. Do you accept that D1527 could have heard this as well?
I said this to another officer. I think the officer said to me, "What's going on?" And I made that comment. It's a regrettable comment. It's not sort of the comment I would use. It's not the language that should have been used. So I apologise for that. But you just got to take into consideration. My adrenaline was going. I just potentially saved this guy's life, removed the ligature from his neck. He was screaming in my face. I was, my feelings were raised at the time. So I did say that. And I regret it, but I didn't say it to him. I said it to another officer.
I think it's to Nathan Ring. It looks like you're walking out and Nathan Ring's walking in, because he responds as we say. He says, "Has he?"
Okay, maybe. There was a lot of people around at the time.
So you wouldn't use those words you say to a detainee,
No.
but you would use them in their presence, obviously, in certain circumstances.
I wouldn't normally use it. This is a one-off. I said it and I say I regret it, but my adrenaline was running quite high just because of what had just happened.
So as well as D1527 being in the room, you said it in front of Mr. Tully, as we know, because he's the one who recorded it. A nurse, Joe Buss, and it looks like Nathan Ring who's entering. Did you know when you said that none of them would take you up on it, using that kind of language?
Not at the time. I mean, everything was going on at the time. There was an incident. It was in the middle of an incident going on. It's not so you stop and say, maybe they would have brought it up afterwards. I don't know.
You don't recall that any of them did?
No.
Would you have used that kind of language if a member of, for example, I know that IMB sometimes oversee use of force events, obviously not unplanned ones, but would you have used that kind of language in front of the IMB?
I wouldn't use that kind of language normally at all. It was a one-off situation, and I've explained because of the incident that was going on.
Nathan Ring enters, as we said. He gave evidence last Friday. I don't know if you saw that. He was asked about referring to D1527, just slightly down the page here, as a Duracell bunny. About 10 seconds after you left, he's entered. We can see that from the transcript timestamp. He then referred to D1527 as a child and said he was sulking, and later he says about him, which is on page 7, he's just a dick. This is more of the same, isn't it? Your comments as you left the room to Mr. Ring and his comments as he came in follow a theme, all insulting language.
It was my comments. It was my comment, one comment.
Your comment and Mr. Ring's comments all follow a theme.
I didn't hear those comments, but they were said because it was on Panorama and it's on this transcript.
You agree it's all inappropriate language?
It is inappropriate language, yes.
Demeaning, possibly, if a detainee hears it.
Potentially.
If you'd heard Mr. Ring say those comments, you say you didn't,
No.
would you have challenged him on them?
I believe maybe afterwards. I don't know. I mean, I didn't hear those comments, so I can't really say I didn't hear those comments. There was an incident that just happened. It was quite a major incident just happened. I had to go off to do my reports. I had to make sure I handed over what was. I handed over to DCM Ring. He sort of took control. I had to go off, but I spoke to Joe Buss outside, and then I left the wing to do my reports.
If you had heard him say, as I asked, he's just a dick, or call him a Duracell bunny, you might or might not have followed it up with him.
I probably would have done, yes.
Would that have been a bit hypocritical, given that he's heard you call the detainee a cock?
Maybe, but as I said, my adrenaline was running high at the time.
According to your statement at paragraph 63, you car shared with Mr. Ring when you were both working at Brook House from time to time. So you'd heard him talk about detained people before, presumably, just sort of chat in the car about your days and things like that.
Not really. When we were outside of work, I didn't really want to talk about work.
Had you ever heard him within work talk about detainees using these sorts of terms? No. And how do you feel about it now that you've seen what he said? Do you feel it's inappropriate for someone who makes comments like that to be working with detained people?
It's not appropriate, but I think I did see Mr. Ring the other day. He said maybe it was a coping mechanism. I can't speak for him. I can only speak for myself.
A coping mechanism because of all the pressures that you're under that you...
That's what he said.
I see.
I mean, everyone's coping mechanisms are different.
Sure. What were yours?
I used to try and make light and joke of things. That was my way of coping.
If we go to page 8, please. So you're now out of the room. You're talking sort of on the E-wing shared area. You say at the top you need to keep an eye on him, either to Mr. Tully or to Nurse Bus, I think. Line 23, you say, what's he doing now? And then at line 28, you say sulking.
Mm-hmm.
And at the bottom of that, we see D1527 says, I will die. No, you don't need to do this, to Nurse Bus. So you'd find him with a ligature around his neck, which you had to cut off, and he'd put a battery in his mouth. And you said to us it's not the actions of someone who's well.
No.
Did you think he was sulking?
It's just the way he came across, the way he was up, as you've seen by the footage, after I cut the ligature off, he was shouting in my face, his mood was up, and then all of a sudden he went down, he sat on the bed with his head down. I didn't mean anything derogatory by it, but he's sulking, that was just the way I explained his demeanour at the time.
And having sort of thought about it now and had an opportunity to think about the events of that day, do you regret using the word sulking?
It might have been not the best word to use, but sulking's not, if someone's sulking, it's not really a bad thing, it's just the way he came across to me. Someone asked me how he is, I said he looks like he's sulking at the time.
And do you stand by your description of him during the ligature and battery event as being aggressive to you?
He was aggressive after he'd stood up. I mean, I cut the ligature down, we pulled him out of the toilet area, we sat him down, and then his mood escalated. So he was aggressive, yes, he was shouting in my face.
So you were Oscar 1 during this event, and we have Mr. Ring here, who's a DCM. Thinking about the example of the language, that the one word cock, and then the use of sulking to describe him, and then the language that Mr. Ring used, which I know you say you didn't see, but you've now read. Think about the sort of example that language sets to maybe more junior members of staff who are around. For example, Mr. Tully was there, of course, who was more junior. Do you agree that it would make it pretty hard for you to later pull up a staff member for using inappropriate language if they've heard you say such things?
I made one comment, and I've explained that there was a wrong comment. I didn't hear Nathan Ring's comment, so I can't comment on what he said.
Do you agree that if detainees heard you speak like this about one of them, it might make them less likely to come to you with concerns that they had about any actions?
Potentially.
And it might make a member of staff who was concerned about a colleague's language less likely to come to you or I suppose, to Mr. Ring?
Yeah, I think you're focusing on language. I mean, you're focusing on language. I think you're reading into this too much. I mean, it's a one-off incident. It was an incident. These things happened. I've explained my comment. I can't speak to it. I think you're reading into it too much, if I'm honest.
Finally, then, on this incident, in your witness at paragraph 85, you say, I was perhaps frustrated by the fact that a member of staff on constant watch waited many minutes before entering D1527's room after they'd lost sight of the detainee. If you're tasked with watching someone, you should take appropriate action when you cannot see them. I was perhaps also frustrated from a safeguarding perspective, as it should have not got to a point where a resident could place a ligature around his neck. I take my role very seriously, and this incident should have been acted upon earlier.
That's correct.
And you think, and I think it was confirmed yesterday, Clayton Fraser was the officer who was keeping constant watch of D1527 at this time. So he told the inquiry yesterday it happened in a split second and that he acted as soon as he noticed something was wrong. But your statement suggests that it should not have got to that point where he hadn't seen what was going on and you had to come in.
Yeah.
And that caused you frustration and concern.
Yes.
Did you report Mr. Fraser for failing to do proper observations as you see it?
I didn't report him, no. I mean, I was frustrated at the time because I felt I did his job for him. If someone's on a constant supervision, it means what it says. You should be supervising them constantly. He didn't for a split minute's time, which is why I entered the room. I think maybe he should have entered the room earlier, and it could have been, that it may not have happened.
Before it got to that point?
Yeah, yeah.
Did you speak, you say you didn't report him, but did you speak to Mr. Fraser informally, as far as you remember, about failing to do constant observation?
I don't think so, no.
Did you take any action at all to ensure what you call a safeguarding issue here doesn't happen again?
What, with Mr. Fraser?
Yeah.
I didn't speak to Clayton after. He didn't often work at Brook House. I didn't work with him a lot. He worked at Tinsley. In hindsight, maybe. I mean, I might have made a comment to him. You should be, if you're on a constant supervision, you should be watching someone all the time.
You've been asked in your witness statement, and you deal with it at 97, about an occasion where you called a detained person a knobhead and a fucking arsehole. this is about the detainee rather than to him, you can turn up 97 and you say you don't consider that the use of those words was appropriate, and you say the use of your language was regrettable.
It is, and I see. I remember that it's when I left the room, and I think the document said it. The door was closed. You've got to bear in mind that you're dealing with. You have quite good relations with some of these residents. I remember that resident. I've been helping him pretty much for a big part of the day with the case, and then you go back and see them, and they sort of throw it in your face a bit. You get abuse constantly on a daily basis, quite bad abuse. So when I left that room, the door was closed and I made those comments. I would not say it to his face. It's like this previous one, it was said to someone else.
The previous one you described as a one-off.
Okay.
So not just a one-off, but unusual.
Yeah, I would never speak to a resident using that language. And both occasions, it wasn't to the resident, it was both when I was leaving the room.
Again, it's to another member of staff, and of course it was Mr. Tully because he was the one who recorded it, so we know it was him, and he's a DCO, I think, at the time.
He was a DCO, yeah.
So again, you're using it in front of a more junior member of staff, although, as we see, not a resident. Can I ask about mental health training then? You discussed this at paragraph 64 of your statement. You say that you spent a lot of time on CSU, the Care and Separation Unit, is that right? As well as E-Wing generally?
Yeah, E-Wing and CSU, they're one leads into the other. So
Yeah.
It's the same level.
Can I ask, just as someone with experience of E-Wing, what's your view on using E-Wing for detainees with mental health issues?
E-Wing was, you had constant supervision rooms. E-Wing was used for people, maybe vulnerable residents, vulnerable residents.
Yep.
There was a couple of rooms there that could be for medical rooms. You had the constant supervision rooms. So it was used for all different. It was a quite challenging wing to work on.
If vulnerable people or vulnerable residents didn't want to be moved to E-Wing, could you use force to take them there while there'd been a planned removal of them to be removed to E-Wing because they were vulnerable, not because they'd done anything wrong, but would you use force in those circumstances?
You wouldn't use force. Force is the last resort. You wouldn't use force on someone that was vulnerable to move them to another area. That doesn't make sense.
Did you consider there was a difference between the reasons why somebody would be on E-Wing? So you can be there because you need to be kept there to keep you safe, to keep an eye on you, or sometimes because you're on Rule 40 or 42, is that right?
If Rule 40, 42, you'd be in CSU.
Which one leads to the other, you said,
Yes.
but they're separate sort of parts.
CSU has 6 rooms and it follows on for the 13 rooms in E-Wing.
And people in their rooms in E-Wing are kept in their room for a period of time that their rooms are locked, which I think is the same with everybody. Obviously, overnight, the rooms are locked. Is that different on E-Wing, or is it the same?
It's the same. I mean, this gentleman was on Rule 40, I believe, on E-Wing. The reason he was on Rule 40 on E-Wing is because he was on a constant supervision, and the doors are different in rooms 7 and 8. They're big glass panels, so it's easier to observe them. But his door would have been locked because that's a regime for Rule 40.
What about being allowed off the wing, so off E-Wing and into sort of, go to the gym or whatever?
Yeah, people on E-Wing were allowed off the wings. It depends what they're down there for. Some people, they could be down there for their own protection, so they wouldn't be going off the wings.
And, sorry.
No, go on.
I wanted to ask more about sort of mental health and vulnerable people. So you say at 42 to 44 that during the relevant period, I'll let you turn to it, there were not enough mental health nurses. And you also note that DCOs were not mental health trained and could not support detainees with those needs.
That's correct, yeah.
Did you consider that you're obviously not a DCO but a DCM, were you trained in that at all,
No.
or were you the same? So when you became a DCM from a DCO, no extra mental health training at all?
No.
So would that have been the same for all DCOs DCMs as far as you know, sorry?
I don't recall any mental health training.
Did you consider then that you and DCOs you worked with were equipped to deal with mentally ill detainees? No. Do you think that you and your colleagues could distinguish between someone who was being disruptive, for another reason, and someone who's being disruptive because they're mentally unwell?
I wouldn't know the difference as I'm not trained in it.
What about someone who's showing signs and symptoms of some of the more complex conditions we get, like PTSD, for example, or trauma survivors?
I'm not trained in that either.
Wouldn't be able to spot it. Were you aware of the introduction in August 2016 of a DSO on the management of adults at risk, the Adults at Risk policy it's called that, or AAR it's sometimes referred to
Adult at
as?
risk, yes.
Yeah. Did you know about that at the time, so 2017, after it came in?
I would have, potentially, yeah. Might have been aware of it. Whether I read it or not, I don't know.
Sorry. And do you recall any training on it or not? Don't know.
I don't recall any, no.
You say at 44 that while you believed at the time that there were not enough mental health nurses, you didn't formally raise this with the SMT. And you say, again, it was not a secret. The SMT were aware of those issues.
In my view, there weren't enough mental health nurses. The ones we did have are really good. Some of them still work there today.
Yeah.
But again, it was like everyone, you're being stretched. Because you did have mental health nurses normally be involved in Royal Fortune reviews, ACDT constant reviews.
They were in demand.
They were in demand, yeah. We all were.
Yeah. If you've got DCOs and DCMs who aren't trained in caring for people with mental illnesses, you potentially need more healthcare staff with those skills. But you say that the SMT were aware of these issues.
I believe so, yeah, so it wasn't a secret.
Do you know how they became aware of those issues?
I just assumed they were aware of these issues. I mean, as I said before, when I had my yearly review, any concerns they brought up, that's probably one of the concerns I would have brought up.
And would you have spoken to, so you're the DCM, was there an E1 in between you and the SMT during the relevant period?
I can't remember, to be honest.
You don't remember if you spoke to anyone specifically? Did you have like somebody you could more informally raise?
I had so many line
higher
managers during my time
Yeah.
there, but as I was a DCM, so I can't, specific dates and that, I don't know. George was my line manager, a guy called Chris Milligan was my line manager, Michelle Brown was my line manager.
Yeah.
So
Don't remember speaking to any of them about this in particular?
only my reviews.
And do you remember that you definitely spoke to them about it in your reviews, or that it's just the
Not
sort of thing you
definitely.
might have done?
Yeah, sort of thing you might have brought up.
Okay, thank you. We have some questions about D1914 now, and you address this incident at paragraph 88 onwards. So just to remind everybody, it's an incident where D1914 was due to be removed out of the country the following day, and so in preparation for that he was moved to E-Wing. This is the detained person who had a history of some heart conditions.
Oh, yes.
In terms of your involvement, there's various officers who record on the DCF2, so the use of force paperwork with the red sheet, that you called them to tell them that they were on the team, and you appear at the briefing. And indeed, when Mr. Dix introduces the event, he says that it will be supervised by DCOs, although he means DCM in your case, Steve Lawton and Shane Farrell. So Mr. Dix is also a DCM, isn't he?
Yes.
Or he was at the time.
Yeah.
He's briefing the team from the note I just quoted at about 9:25, so just before the event. We saw footage of this during the first phase of the inquiry because Mr. Tully was asked about it, and I understand you've been provided with that footage too. Has that jogged your memory of your role in the events? As I understand it, there were two teams. One was focused on the roommate of D1914 and one on 1914 himself. Mm-hmm. And what was your role in relation to those teams?
I was supervising the team of, so what was his? 1914, the other gentleman, so his roommate. So my role was to ask that gentleman to exit the room.
So you're not part of the team, of course, in PPE who carry out the force on anyone or carry out the removal of anyone.
I had a team in PPE.
Yeah, sorry, you're not wearing it. You're,
No.
Yeah.
Supervising it.
Supervising it. And who's in charge of the event as it relates to D1914?
Who was running?
Yeah.
Steve Dix was running. I think he did the briefing.
Yes, he did. What, if anything, was your decision-making role in terms of the decision to use force on 1914? Was that completely up to Mr. Dix, or were you involved in that, or were you solely focused on the roommate?
I was focused on the roommate.
So you didn't, for example, decide when to go in, what sort of negotiations to use on D1914? You were just talking about the roommate with your team?
I believe so. I can't remember the briefing, but my job was to get the roommate out of the room as quickly and safely as possible.
And I understand that you chose some of the officers to use on this occasion, which was possibly the ones to be on your team, which I suppose would make sense. But in any event, even if we're talking about other times, talk to me about how you'd choose a team for a use of force event.
Sometimes you wouldn't choose a team yourself. It depends how quickly you needed to get a team together for whatever incident or situation it was, because you need to be going away and doing your briefing script. So sometimes you would call the control room, I need a certain amount of officers in full PPE kit for an intervention. But if you were choosing a team, you would probably choose people the same height. You put experienced people, it depends on the guy's history, the resident's history.
And Mr. Pashali gave evidence about use of force to the inquiry, and he said that the same people tended to be used. He said he was one of those people, and he'd raised concerns about it and was told get on with it, and that there was jokes made that he and others would enjoy it, and he said he in fact didn't enjoy it. Do you recall the same people being used repeatedly, maybe the strongest people or tallest people?
It did seem that the same people were used a lot more than others. So I agree with Mr. Pascali on that, yes.
Who's making the decision to use those same people?
Well, as I
more than
said, it
others?
could be the DCM if you've got time, it could be the
Yeah.
control room, just maybe picking the same people.
So who works in the control room? What's their level of
DCR.
DCOs? So sometimes DCOs can make up the teams based on who's there, and sometimes DCMs choose them.
Because they know where people are working and where they could spare staff.
Did anyone ever complain to you that they were being used more often than other people for
Not
use of
complain
force?
to me, no.
Did they mention it to you? I'm always being chosen.
Not that I can remember.
So Mr. Collier, the inquiry's use of force expert, has reviewed this incident, and I think you've been given an opportunity to consider his report generally. However, he only focuses on the use of force in relation to D1914, and I understand that was Mr. Dix, that's why he did the briefing, and he's mentioned, you're not in fact mentioned in the report in relation to that incident at all. So all I will say about that is that Mr. Collier says that, in general, force was not used as a last resort on that occasion. He says that there was an opportunity to continue with dialogue. And he also says that using staff in PPE was not necessary or reasonable. Neither was using force at all. Now, just a question about PPE. Mr. Ring was asked about this yesterday and said with planned use of force, you were all in full PPE. He said there's no planned use of force without full PPE. Is that right?
That's correct.
Is that a Brook House policy, or as far as you know, is it a wider policy? Why always PPE for planned use of force?
I think that's what's in the use of force manual.
So even with somebody who, is quite small or doesn't, they're a bit resistant to going, but they're not likely to put up a fight, you still use sort of full
PPE.
PPE for everything. Okay, thank you. So thinking back to that incident, if you'd have had concerns about Mr. Dix's choice to use force in those circumstances, would you have been able to raise them with him?
I wasn't there. I'd gone away. I didn't see the use of
Sorry,
force.
not during the event,
Right.
in the lead up. So you were there at during some of the briefing discussions.
I was there for the briefing,
We'll have a
yeah.
look at that. Would you say that you knew enough about the background, and if you did know enough about the background and had concerns, would you have felt happy to raise them with Mr. Dix? Say, have you tried having one last chat with him, or try again tomorrow?
I don't understand what you mean.
So Mr. Collier is critical of the decision to use force. He says that the flight wasn't until the next day. It wasn't necessary to use force on that day. If you'd have been in the room with Mr. Dix when he was making that decision to use force, and if you would have had a concern at the time, would you have felt able to raise that with Mr. Dix?
Yes, I think so. But I think he was being moved to facilitate his flight for the next day.
That's right. He was being moved to E-Wing and the flight was the following day.
Yes.
Perhaps we can turn now to the transcripts which relate to this event. So if we go to TRN 0000087, it's at tab 10 of your bundle, Chair.
Is this coming up on the screen? Oh, yeah.
Yes, sorry, there we go. Page 16, if you don't mind, thank you. So this is the briefing in which you're sort of involved sometimes and sometimes not involved. You introduced there at 551 the background, detainee is fit to fly, it should say. We'll need a medical expert, and you read out.
Escort. Medical escort.
Escort. And you read out, I'm happy for reasonable force to be used to facilitate the removal. So you're reading from a sheet there, I think, somebody else's decision. I believe, and then you speak about the doctor, and then at 5:70 you mention bypass, triple bypass, heart attack, triple bypass booked in for August. And down to the bottom of that page, at 5:94, Callum Tully, who's heard that medical background and is preparing to be involved, says, now you've got me nervous for slightly different reasons now. Jan Pashali says, oh, relax, man, you will be fine. Dave Webb says here, if he dies, he dies. And going over to the next page, Jan says, yeah, exactly. Dave Webb says, it's nothing on us. Now, you'd left the room at this point. You can see from the footage. Turning to page 19, at 6:74 onwards, Callum Tully says, line 674, so bottom part, Callum Tully, because I'm wearing the shield and just like thinking, surely they should get a supervisor in for this, CNR supervisor. Dan Lake says, yeah, John Connolly or something like that. Callum says, I suppose Dave Webb is actually on the restraints, is he? Dan Lake says, yeah. Callum Tully says, we'll see what happens. Dan Lake, if he dies, he dies. Callum Tully, obviously I hope not. And then there's another reference, which I won't take you to, at page 20, where Callum says he's worried about this guy, and Dave Webb says that they've got the fit to fly letter, which he describes as a disclaimer. Had you heard talk like that in front of you?
No.
Had you heard the phrase, if he dies, he dies?
I haven't heard that mentioned myself.
In relation to
It was talked about in the wing office, an E-wing. I think it was a bit of a joke. It refers to a phrase from a famous film, I think.
Is it Rocky IV?
It is Rocky IV, I believe.
So what was it talked about on the E-wing?
No, it was just a phrase that someone made once. I've never heard it said. To be honest, that was the only time I've heard it said. I've never heard it said in front of residents. I've never heard it said like Dave Webb said it does. I haven't heard that.
You haven't heard it said in front of residents?
No.
Have you heard it said about residents?
No.
So in what context was it said?
No, they were talking, like discussing where it comes from. That was all. That it's from a film. It's a phrase from a film.
So why was it brought up?
It was just talking in the E-wing office one day.
About who dying?
No one dying. They were talking about the phrase from the film.
They were just saying, have you seen a film where there's a phrase? If
They
he
mentioned
dies, he dies.
that phrase and they said it's from a film.
Mr. Lake gave evidence this morning and said he didn't recall saying it himself, but he said, I've heard it around. And when he was asked specifically, he said it's just the culture of Brook House. So similar to what you're saying. Phrase has been heard, said around.
I haven't heard it been said around. I just know that that's where it's from.
Right. And when people were talking about it on E-wing, were they talking about, I heard someone else say it and here's where it's from?
No, it's just said it was from a film. That's all. I think that's all. I haven't heard it said. The phrase is from a film. That's all I know.
And how do you feel listening to people saying it in relation to use of force, planned use of force on someone?
Well, I don't think they did.
Here in this example where Callum says, I suppose Dave Webb is actually on the restraints. Dan Lake says, yeah. Callum says, we'll see what happens. And Dan Lake says, if he dies, he dies.
Which line is that? Sorry.
I'm reading from line 680. Callum Tully, we'll see what happens. Dan Lake, if he dies, he dies. Callum says, I hope,
and
obviously
then
I
laughed.
hope not.
Yeah. I wasn't there. I didn't hear that.
Do you accept that that's used in relation to the use of force that they're planning?
I don't think so.
You think they were just quoted from a film in the middle of the conversation?
And that's why he was laughing afterwards. It's probably something he's just said. No one wants to see anyone die, do they?
And then if we go to page 33. Thank you. It's 1124, line 1124. This is you, Steve Lawton. Staying outside. So something, you're going into the right, stand there like that, imitates holding a shield up. It stops him fucking about. Callum Tully says, yeah, understood. Steve Lawton, Jan will probably push you into him anyway. And then Dave Webb says, Alice is our 4. So use a shield to stop him fucking about, and the plan is for Jan to push Callum and his shield into D1914. Do you remember that conversation?
Not really. I'm guessing that where it says you hold the shield, do you hold the shield to stop them moving? You could maybe hold not on them, you could put it at an angle. What I mean by I'm probably pushing him anyway. I think Callum was a bit worried about being on the shield maybe, and I just said, look, trying to reassure him, you've got 2 officers behind you. You go in a team of 3.
Can we turn to the transcript TRN 0000090, please? And this is page 3, tab 13 for your note, Chair. Talking about the same detained man, but this is 2 weeks later.
Who 1914?
Sorry? No, well, it hasn't come up on the screen yet, if you just wait a second.
It will be in your bundle, so if you want to look at it.
It's at
So
tab
in
13.
Tab 13, page 3.
It's only a short excerpt. And this is, we see from the cipher, the same detainee. You're saying that D1914, inaudible, triple heart bypass. Ryan Bromley says his body has just been butchered. You say something can fight. He looks like a traveller. He's seen like travelling circus, like a bare knuckle. He looks like one of them. So do you think that's an appropriate way to refer to a detainee in front of other staff looking like a traveller or someone from
He
a
was a
travelling
traveller. I
circus?
knew this guy. He was a Romanian gentleman. I had a lot of dealings with him. I got on really quite well with him, to be fair. He told me he was a traveller.
So you're referring to him in the way that he would refer to himself. And finally, you took part, on this point, you took part in an interview with Verita on the 26th of January 2018, which we do have, although I won't ask for it to be on the screen. I'll read it out to you, unless you wish to look at it. It's in the, it's at VER 000270 for anyone's note. You were asked what groups of the population would you say are most difficult to deal with, or aren't they? Are they just individuals? And you say it is individuals. On the whole, the Albanians can be quite problematic. They tend to go around in groups and they can be a bit problematic before there's any charter if they're told to go, which is done on the overnight. Jamaicans can be a bit loud, play the dominoes and that, but it's a bit unfair saying, and then you stop, and you say you do get your problematic individuals who can incite under individuals. And then you go on and say it's part of the job you have to deal with. Were detainees treated differently depending on their nationality and perceptions about how they might behave?
No.
Was there an assumption that certain nationalities might be more problematic than others?
Not really, as I've explained there. I mean, you get trained with different nationalities, but you get problematic people, whatever, any walk of life.
Would different decisions be made about, for example, the use of force team to use on detainees from one nationality versus another?
No.
We've heard in the course of the inquiry, not attributed to you, very explicitly racist language, for example, the use of the N-word being used at Brook House. Did you ever hear anything like that when you were at Brook House?
No, never.
What would you have done if you had?
I would have challenged it.
And are you shocked to hear now that that was happening?
Yes.
And asking about another specific event, you mentioned this at 113 of your witness statement, so you might wish to turn back to tab 1. It's page 24 is where that section of your statement starts. This is an incident where D1538 was restrained by Mr. Bromley, Mr. London and Mr. Farrell in a classroom. And you weren't directly involved in this incident yourself, so we may have questions for those who were. But you were asked about some comments that were made by Mr. Bromley after the incident. So on the 10th of June, Mr. Bromley spoke about this incident to Mr. Tully and said, "Did you see Shane?" Sorry, Mr. Tully said, "Did you see Shane?" Mr. Bromley responded, he took his head clean off, and then went on later to say they pulled his neck right down. Obviously, we can ask Mr. Bromley about the comments that he made. It's obviously clearly a figure of speech as well. His head didn't come clean off. But these words suggest, don't they, that Mr. Bromley felt that a lot of force had been used. If he felt that way, would you have expected him to tell you or to tell another DCM about that?
Yes, I would, yeah.
And do you recall that anyone did speak to you about this event? Mr.
No.
Bromley tell you he was
I was
concerned?
involved in this event. I was the Oscar one at the time, so I attended this incident.
Oh, you did attend, fine.
Yes.
And you do say that you reviewed this incident as well at 116, I believe close to the time. So you say either you or another manager would have reviewed the reports and viewed CCTV footage as well.
I review the reports because the reports end up with the Oscar one.
So you say at 116, I or other managers would have reviewed the reports and viewed CCTV footage. The top paragraph of the last page of your statement.
Yeah.
Was that what you'd normally do when there'd been a use of force, or why would CCTV
I'm trying to think
have
about
been...
CCTV. I wouldn't have reviewed the CCTV. I would have reviewed the reports.
I see. Mr. Collier mentions in his statement in relation to this event that no body-worn video cameras had been turned on at the time, so we only have the CCTV.
Right.
And he also says there's no record of injury form, even a blank one to say that there is no injury. Did you pick up on those things when you reviewed the reports?
That there was no body-worn cameras turned
Yeah.
on? Yeah, I did, yeah.
Did you do anything about that? Did you speak to the people who were involved?
Sometimes when it's an incident and it happens that quick, you don't have a chance to put your body-worn camera on.
Do you think that this was one of those incidents where it was
Yeah,
also
maybe,
fast?
potentially, yeah. I mean, I remember the incident. I was in and out. I was at the incident, but I was sort of overseeing the whole incident, not just the use of force incident.
I see.
You've got to take a lot of things into consideration when you're dealing with an incident like that.
So there'd been a period where I think the detained person had picked up sharpened
I believe
pencil.
so, yeah.
And then the force was used and there was a period of time. So there wasn't time, as far as you can remember, that body-worn video cameras could have been turned on.
Potentially, maybe, but I don't know.
What about the lack of a record of injury form? Did you notice that when you were reviewing the records?
A lack of?
Record of injury to detainee forms, so it wasn't filled in.
I don't know.
I'm asking you about another specific incident now, just a brief one. We've heard from a formerly detained person, D643, you should have the on your list there. We heard his live evidence to the inquiry on Tuesday, the 22nd of February. He was noted or accused of plotting to escape Brook House, and this was an occasion, from his recollection, he'd attended hospital due to chest pain. The doctor had told him he needed to come back for a CT scan, and she'd written her phone number on a form given to the escort so that the scan could be arranged, and we've seen his healthcare notes that confirm the same. Healthcare viewed this as a possible escape attempt, and it was recorded this way on his records, and we see later on, a few months later, he's still mentioned as a possible escape risk. He says in his statement at page 32, in his statements at DL 0000228, but I'll just quote it, he complained to you about this accusation. He says, I remember that I complained to DCM Steve Lawton about this, but he did not listen to me. Do you remember this gentleman?
I vaguely
talking to
remember
you?
that. I vaguely remember the guy. I think was at the centre for quite some time. I had quite a good relationship with the guy, which is probably why he came to me. If that was the case, maybe he thought I didn't listen to him. I would have reported that to our security department.
What would you have reported? Just that he's complained about
His
it?
concerns, yeah.
And is it then for the security department to update someone's escape risk?
Yes.
So you'd assume that if he did talk to you, you've told security and then it's their action to take forward?
Yeah.
The inquiry's also heard evidence from a former Brook House employee, Mr. Owen Syred. So he spoke of an occasion back in 2015 to 2016 when he suspected a female officer of bringing in
2015?
drugs. Yeah.
Blimey, 7 years ago.
I'll summarise the account given in his statement for you, but for the reference, it's INN 000007. It's paragraph 90. He said he could recall a DCO failing to challenge the presence of a detainee who was a suspected drug dealer. He raised the issue with this DCO, and they said, don't go throwing your weight around with him, which Mr. Syred took to be a threat. And then he says, in these circumstances, together with my colleague Sean Nichols, we submitted a security report and spoke to the night manager, Steve Lawton. We inspected the security camera recording and we could see clearly that the suspected drug dealer passed objects to other detainees on the stairs, which we assumed to be drugs, and before leaving he spoke in this DCO's ear. And then he says that she was subsequently suspended, but I don't know the precise details. Do you remember this event at all?
No.
If you were told, not even just in 2015, but in any period, about a DCO being seen speaking to a known drug dealer and someone raised concerns about it, and maybe they were seen passing objects, what sort of actions would you have taken?
So they filled out an SIR, did they? Is that what it says?
I'm afraid I'm just quoting from his statement, but is that what you'd expect to happen? Someone would fill out a serious
If they'd seen... Sorry, can you repeat?
Yeah, so for example, if a DCO came to you and said, I think another DCO is, potentially passing packages to a detainee, can you help me with this? Can you look at the CCTV? You seem to suggest you'd fill out an SIR.
I would go straight to the security department with that and report it straight away, yes.
And would that be to the head of security or anyone in security?
Potentially that. If that's the information I was given, I probably would go to the head of security, yes.
Because it's particularly serious?
Yes.
Other witnesses have told us about drug taking in the centre, particularly spice amongst detainees. And I think yesterday hooch was mentioned as well. Thinking about 2017 in particular, do you recall a particularly high level of spice use by the detained people?
There was it came in fits and starts. You have a certain time when it was rife and then it was settled down. So there was numerous medical responses where spice, what we believed to be spice, was taken.
Yeah. Did you have any view on how drugs might be getting into the centre?
Visits, post. Things with spice, it's very hard to detect. From what we were told, you could put it on a blank bit of paper. So it was a lot harder. It's not like cannabis where you actually see it. It's harder to detect.
You can sort of spray it onto paper?
I believe so, yes.
Were visits, you say visits might have been a point of
Visits
entry?
could have been a contact or through the post.
Were visitors searched before they came into the centre?
Yes.
And was the post searched in any way or checked?
I believe so.
It might not be your area.
It wasn't
so
my area, no.
What about staff? So you worked there. Would you have been searched when you entered the centre?
Not very often.
How often?
Staff searches didn't happen very often then at all. It's hard to say. It was a long time ago, but it didn't happen. Very rarely. Sometimes they'd have dogs in, but again, that was very rare.
Would it be random, or would you know in advance that there was going to be dogs, for example?
You wouldn't know in advance, no. It defeats the object, really, doesn't it?
When you say not very often, do you mean sort of less than once a month?
Yes.
Less than maybe a couple of times a year?
Sometimes you might get, but you have a few in a month, and you wouldn't have them for... There was no pattern.
I see. Were staff ever drug tested?
Not as far as I'm aware, no.
And do you recall any concerns being raised, whether in the relevant period or otherwise, about drugs being brought into the centre by staff?
It was a possibility. I never knew of it.
Was it something people talked about as something that might be happening?
Not to me, they didn't.
What about concerns about staff taking drugs? Were there concerns that staff weren't fit to work because they themselves were taking drugs?
It wasn't brought to my attention, no.
I'm going to move on to the period after the Panorama broadcast now. So the first thing I'd like you to look at on the screen, please, is CJS 001036. And you have this also at tab 14. This is a supported living plan for a detained person called D1275. And you have the cipher. So this supported living plan, while we're just waiting for it to come up on the screen, was opened on the 4th of September 2017. And you may remember that was the day of the broadcast of the Panorama programme.
Okay.
I'll tell you it wasn't. And it was opened, we can see from the document, in anticipation of the broadcast, because I think you were told it was going to be on TV, but obviously not what the content exactly would be of the broadcast. Fine. So we have it there. You'll see from the face of it there, the detainee's name, which is ciphered. It's ticked there, learning disabilities, as is other, and somebody's filled in safeguarding. And we see halfway down the page, required frequency of observation and conversations are 1 observation each AM, PM, eve, with a conversation plus 2 nightly observations. So that's 3 conversations a day, and then at night you just sort of check that they're okay, but obviously don't wake them up. If we go to page 2, there's space there for the detainee's signature, but it says would not sign. And if we go to 4, Now we can see the reason for it to be opened. He is noted as safe. Oh, sorry, page 5. The document's got page numbers written on it as well. He's says, have they stated that they are suspected of being an adult risk? No. Dash concerns over safeguarding of him due to allegations made by BBC Panorama. And there below, detainee in box C. Detainee requires support from staff in light of BBC Panorama programme. We can see this is all completed, I think, by Mr. Povey-Myers. He signs it off at the bottom as head of safeguarding. Mm-hmm. You've seen Panorama, I assume?
I have, yes.
D1275 was filmed on the 14th of June 2017, having been suspected of taking spice. So he's lying on the ground, and there's footage of him being mocked with officers making remarks like calling him a div and scrotum, and saying about him, this is Derek Murphy this time, if he dies, he dies. We've heard evidence on D1275's behalf, although not from him directly, addressing his mental condition, vulnerability, and his lack of capacity in relation to various matters. So that's who he is. The SLP, as we can see, was opened due to concerns about what was on Panorama. You are involved because you close it, and I'm going to ask you about that. Do you happen to remember what those concerns more specifically were, or just that he looks like, in light of Panorama, we might need to keep an eye on him?
I didn't open it. I wasn't even on site or the next day. I was away on a course when Panorama was aired.
I see you weren't in the centre.
No.
Can we turn to page 11, please? And this is, you signed it at the bottom, that's your writing, or you've written your name there at the bottom.
Yeah.
So you're the one to close it, and it says D1275 came to the office, and I asked him how he feels as he felt affected and vulnerable after the event shown in the Panorama documentary. He now feels more settled and safer in the centre. He has no issues with any detainees or staff in the centre, and will let us know if he has any issues. Therefore, the document is now closed. And then the reason closed, feels okay now after Panorama and feeling a lot more safer and settled. And you've signed it off there. Mm-hmm. Did you know that he hadn't yet seen the Panorama broadcast by this point? Because according to the notes in the same document, he missed it when it was on because he couldn't use his remote.
No, I didn't know that, no. It's not the sort of thing you ask in a review, have you seen a programme?
Well, he's being watched because of concerns about the events that are shown on the programme, but you don't know whether or not he saw it. Did you know that he'd been on an anti-bullying plan in June 2017 with information that there was a concern maybe that he lacked capacity?
No.
And did you or anyone else, when closing this plan, have an opinion on whether he had capacity, or would you say that you're not trained to assess mental capacity?
I'm not, and that's why we've got a mental health nurse present at the review. I don't recall this SLP anyway. I deal with documents daily. Sure. It was a long time ago. So
if there is a capacity issue, maybe just not with him, but with anyone, because obviously some detainees can lack capacity to make various different decisions, is that something that you'd always defer to a mental health nurse or qualified person?
I would always have them present as much as I can when it comes to reviews.
Thank you. Can we go to page 9, please? And on that there's a care plan. I think it's going to be sideways. Oh, no, it's not. Fantastic. This is care plan. So they're the issues that kind of need to happen while the SLP is open, as I understand it. And point 3 says, it's a bit difficult to read, it looks like requires solicitor, and then action required, welfare to book opportunity for...
Appointment.
Book appointment for solicitor, and that's signed by somebody, Tricia, welfare.
Yeah.
And then the action is completed, but it says saw welfare, it doesn't say that he saw a solicitor. And on behalf of D1275, we're told that he in fact didn't see a solicitor at that time. Did you know that when you closed the form, he'd been noted as requiring a solicitor but hadn't in fact seen a solicitor?
No, he was referred to welfare there.
And is the consequence of deciding to close an SLP that no one is then monitoring him in the same way that they were? So you're not doing the 3 observations a day and conversations. Does that all come to an end when you close an SLP?
It does, yes.
If you'd have heard differently about his capacity or vulnerability, for example, that he continued to be vulnerable or he continued to need to see a solicitor, would that have prevented you from closing the SLP?
I don't remember this one, but yes, possibly it would be. I mean, you have the whole point of a review. You have people, a multidisciplinary team there present. Mm-hmm. It was decided by all of us afterwards that he no longer needed to be on a document, so it was closed.
And one last issue for you, again about the post-Panorama period. Can we show on the screen INQ 00001? Chair, you have this at your tab 7. This is a Facebook comment made in the wake of Panorama. Your statement says you don't often use social media. Do you remember if you went on there specifically to see what people were saying about the broadcast, or was it just that you happened to see something?
I can't remember. So this was just after Panorama, was it?
Actually, it's not dated because there's a year ago, but we don't know when the screenshot was taken.
Right.
The person who first commented, their name's been redacted, but they say, poor Callum being bullied by other staff members for crying over what they were doing to the people in that centre. Callum is a gentleman with a big heart, and I wish him all the best in his future football career. And then you've replied, he's a fake, it's all an act, I worked with him, don't be fooled. So, he's a fake, it's all an act, and don't be fooled. You're not suggesting, are you, that things that were recorded didn't in fact happen?
I'm not suggesting that, no.
So, why was it an act?
I worked with Callum a lot, and I knew him before he went off, because he was working, then he went off for a period of time, then he came back when he was doing what he was doing. I knew him before and after, and he was a totally different person. I worked with Callum quite a lot. He stayed away from trouble in those days. I mean, I've had an officer come to me saying that he was upset about him because he made inappropriate comments. I said, you need to report it. You know, I wasn't there. But he stayed away from trouble in those days. He came back. Obviously, we know now in hindsight, he wanted to be involved in everything.
So when you say don't be fooled, you're not saying don't be fooled by what you've seen on the broadcast, the scenes from inside Brook House. You're just talking about
people were upset with Callum. They felt disappointed. They were angry, frustrated with what had happened.
Did people see him as a snitch?
I can't answer that. I didn't see him as a snitch. I was just angry at what had happened. I felt let down. I had quite a good working relationship with Callum, but I felt quite let down.
I have no further questions for you, Mr. Lawton. The chair may do, though.
Thank you. Yes, I do have a couple of questions. You say you felt let down by what happened in relation to Mrs. Tully. In what respect did you feel let down?
As I said earlier, the centre was running on low staff. Those staff that were there, it was very challenging. On a daily basis, you would get abused, threatened, your family be threatened, and it wasn't nice. But then, and now I've had it myself. You know, someone could come in there, they're not happy. A resident could be not happy. They'd abuse me. They'd threaten to do things to my wife. They threatened to do things to my kids. They threatened to say they're going to do awful things to my parents. An hour later, once they calmed down, staff would sit down with these people and help them. Do you understand what I mean? So it's very frustrating. Everyone's human beings, and to take that abuse, it's not nice. It's not nice, and that's what it was like. And this is regular. So I think people felt let down by Callum because he was part of a team. It was a close-knit team, the staff in those days. Everyone looked out for everyone. So I think that's why people felt let down by Callum.
Mr. Lawton, did you have a view on some of the footage that we saw in Panorama of the treatment of detained people? Were you surprised by any of that you saw on the footage?
Such as?
The use of force, the use of language, the swearing, some of the disrespectful language that we've heard.
Yes, I'd never encountered any of that disrespectful language. What do you mean by use of force? Which use of force?
I'm specifically referring to the event on the 25th of April.
On Ewing, the resident
Ewing.
after I cut him that resident.
Indeed, yeah.
I wasn't there, so I can't comment on that. I mean, you've spoken to people involved in that previously, so it's down to them to comment on that.
Thank you. I'd also just like to ask you a brief question about, you will have heard evidence, I'm sure, from some of the other members of staff that talked about their own coping mechanisms for some of the difficult, the environment that they were in, some of the challenging experiences that they had while they were working at Brook House. You told us earlier that one of your coping mechanisms was the use of humour. Can you remember whether coping mechanisms, the need to kind of think about some of the things that you were dealing with, was any of that covered in any of the training?
What, coping mechanisms?
Yeah.
Well, no, everyone's got their own coping mechanisms. You can't train that to something that's in you. I mean, I tried to do it. I had a good relationship with staff. I used to get round, laughing and joking, was trying to keep morale up. You know, I tried to support my staff as much as and I still do now. I mean, it's totally different now. The centre is like night and day. The way the centre's run now, the way it was then is totally different.
Are there ever discussions now about what might be inappropriate or more appropriate coping mechanisms?
In the training?
In the training or in your day-to-day involvement with more junior members of staff?
Well, I engage with my staff on a daily basis. I speak with them. But I don't see how you can teach people coping mechanisms. Everyone's got their own coping mechanisms, whatever they are. You can't teach someone that, I don't think.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Lawton. They're all the questions I have. Thank you very much, Ms. Moore.
Thank you, Chair. It seems like a good time for lunch break now. We can return at 2 p.m. and we have evidence from Sandra Carver.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Lawton.
Thank
I know
you.
It's not an easy experience, but I'm grateful for your evidence.
You're welcome.
Thank you. I'll see you at 2 o'clock.